Good evening and welcome everybody online and watching subsequently online and here tonight. A few changes to the committee since we last met. Councillor Butt has been replaced by Councillor Bartlett, for which you're very welcome. Now, first, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping notice.
Thank you, Chair. Please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point, which is at the front of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For everyone in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, can you tell us if there are apologies for this meeting?
So we have received apologies from Councillor John Beasley, Councillor Margaret Phipps and Samantha Acton, and also to note that Councillor Vicky Slade is joining us, but she is here remotely.
Thank you. And substitutes?
Substitute members, we have Councillor Toby Slade for Councillor Beasley and Councillor Leslie Dedman for Councillor Phipps.
Councillor Slade, Councillor Dedman, thank you for coming. Welcome. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's with regards to agenda item 8, discussing the strategy on procurement and commissioning. I work for an organisation that is commissioned by the council to deliver services for young people, so I will be leaving the meeting at that point. But I would like to come back after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, of course. Okay, moving on to item 4, the confirmation of minutes. Now, it was noted that independent member Lindy Jansen van Vuren was present at that meeting virtually, so we would like that corrected in the minutes. So subject to that addition, do we have a mover and a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tarling. And
I'm happy to second.
Councillor Andrews, thank you very much. Do we have consensus on the minutes? Thank you very much. And on the actions sheet, again, I'm very pleased with the addition of this action sheet. I think it's very helpful. Did any members have any comments on that before we move on? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's also to provide positive feedback on the action sheet. It's really helpful. There was a couple of things that I noted that I wondered should be on the action sheet, just to make sure that they don't fall off. One being around future places, which I know that's on our forward plan. But my concern is that it might get lost. And the other point was whether things like on page 18 of the minutes, where it talks about the review of the function of audit and governance, just wondering whether that could be on the action sheet so that we can hear a report back on how that is progressing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Democratic Services indicating they want to come back on that.
So in terms of future places, so when the minutes of the future places meeting are published, there will be actions which will then be added to that action sheet. So just to reassure you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And on the other item, would it be helpful to email still afterwards to make sure that that gets added to the action sheet?
Can I just check, Chair? Is everyone happy for that issue to be added?
Are we happy for that issue to be added? Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to public issues. Public questions, statements, and petitions. Have any been submitted?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we have 2 public questions from Mr. Alex McKinstry in relation to agenda items 12 and 14.
Thank you very much. Mr. McKinstry, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. First question, agenda item 12, page 207, significant issues arising. Can you confirm in total how much council tax revenue has been recovered through investigations into erroneous or fraudulent single persons discount claims since internal audit began this work in December 2024. Can you also confirm what additional sum has been raised, again in total since December 2024, by way of related penalties? And what is this latter money being used for? Is it ring-fenced for any specific purposes?
Thank you. Internal Audit did not begin reviewing single-person discounts in December 2024, as the questioner suggests. They performed reviews of single-person discounts from November 2023 to December 2024, the results of which were within the Chief Internal Auditor's Annual Opinion Report 2024-25, which was presented to the 24th of July 2025 Audit and Governance Committee. From December 2024, Internal Audit passed the review of single persons discounts to the Council Tax Department. With regards to the second question, since December 2024, over £284,000 has been raised from discounts being removed and £22,000 of penalties levied. Once a discount has been removed or a penalty levied, the customer is billed appropriately and the account enters our normal recovery process if the instalments are not paid. Any sums raised and recovered form part of the council's normal income and are not ring-fenced for specific purposes.
Okay, thank you for that. And the second question relates to item 14, the forward plan, which notes that a meeting on the 24th of September 2025 was devoted to the Future Places interim report, albeit only parts 1 to 4 of it. Why have the draft minutes of that meeting not been presented to the committee tonight for approval? Can you also explain why debate on the final report has been deferred to a newly arranged meeting to be held on the 6th of November 2025?
Thank you. The Chair has agreed with the committee that the Future Places investigation will next be discussed at a single agenda item meeting on the 6th of November, similar to the meeting of the 24th of September. This approach is intended to allow appropriate time for committee discussion rather than condense the item into a core meeting of the committee with multiple agenda items. The draft minutes of the meeting on the 24th of September have not been presented at this meeting as they have not yet been published. While Democratic Services always endeavours to publish minutes in a timely manner, a number of committee meetings were required to be rearranged due to the pre-election period for the recent election in the Talbot and Branksome Woods ward, resulting in a highly condensed schedule of meetings to be serviced during the second half of September. The Chair is aware that the minutes will be published with the agenda for the next meeting on 6th of November and will therefore appear as a clear reference point alongside other related items for the Future Places investigation meeting.
Thank you very much indeed.
And public statements.
Thank you, Chair. There are 3 public statements from Mr. Philip Gattrell on agenda item 6, the External Auditor Audit Progress and Sector Update. Mr. Gattrell has nominated the clerk to read his statements out on his behalf. Statement 1, Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, Registered Local Government Electors, Annual Accounting Information Request Rights 2024-25. A local authority ensures appropriate legislation applies to those in the community receiving services and benefits. Specific statutes also provide rights, including 2014 Act Sections 26 and 27, to ensure an independent component of compliance by councils. It may assist this regulatory committee to remind concerning those rights. Section 26, obtain from a council within a limited public inspection period information regarding the annual draft statement of accounts. This also enables electors to ask questions of the external auditor whose duties are determined by the 2014 Act. Section 27, raise objections with the auditor regarding the accounts. Rights must be exercised within the inspection period to secure the auditor's substantive response to electors, but council officers have previously repeatedly contravened their obligation to respond in time. My following issue records the position for 2024-25. Statement 2. 2014 Act Section 26 request for 2024-25. It is important first to dispel possible misconceptions regarding a council's registered local government electors' above rights. Freedom of information requests are distinct from Section 26 rights, which are not subject to potential information providing time cost limits. That was established in the prevailing 2021 case of Moss v Royal Borough of Kingston. The case similarly affirmed electors' existing 2014 Act core rights during the annual public inspection period stipulated by the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. The regulations also contain an authority's fuller obligations. In view of council officers' previous non-compliance, my earlier issues emphasised the Moss case decision and its citation of the preceding Veolia case, defining electors' democratic participation as custodians of the not infallible custodian auditor. Officer response to my 2024-25 Section 26 information request improved, but was received only shortly before the final date. My next issue refers. Statement 3. Section 26 request responses for 2024-25 accepted by the auditor as my Section 27 objections include the Council's year-end bank account balance, £4,794,000 recorded in Accounts Note 16 on page 50 is incorrect with reference to the anomalous negative cash balances, £11,565,000. Arising from multifarious individual elements, this indicates there was a net overdrawn balance of up to £6,771,000. This further denotes that the trust funds held by the council have been wrongly utilised for council purposes. Interest was not applied to the trust funds. Information received confirms material system and internal control weaknesses affecting the council's vulnerable laptop computers. This is due to the irrational accounting policy whereby bulk purchases of laptops individually costing less than the £10,000 capitalisation de minimis limit are capitalised and subject to a degree of fixed assets inventory control, whereas numerically smaller purchase orders of high value in 2024-25 are charged to revenue. End.
Thank you very much. With that, we move on to item 6.
Can I just, in the absence of
Councillor
Councillor Beasley, can I ask for that those to be circulated to other councillors on the committee and also the independent members? Thank you.
Of course. I mean, we do that as a matter of course, don't we? So that's yeah, appreciated. Right, item 6, external auditor, audit progress and sector update. Welcome representatives from Grant Thornton here in person tonight. Handing over to Katie Wybray. Is that right?
This is our usual progress report to be noted by the committee. I'll take the report as read, but it just sets out our progress against the 24-25 financial statement and value for money audit. So at this stage, we're making good progress. We've still got a way to go to complete the audit, but we've set out some of the high-level areas of progress at this stage. We are aiming to bring our audit findings and value for money annual auditor's report to the November audit committee. Only other thing I wanted to mention is that since the last committee, our audit certificate for the 23-24 financial statements has now been certified. You'll be aware that we had to keep that open for the NAO to confirm that they completed their group procedures before we were able to issue that, but that has now been issued, so that concludes the 23-24 audit. Wasn't planning to go into that in any more detail, but we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I have a question on that, and it relates to what you've presented to us previously about the work being done given the backstop arrangements and how you've managed to get the assurance you need on previous years, and particularly around the starting point. Are you able to comment a little bit on how difficult you found it given that?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, to be honest, we've not focused on the build back work. We've just been focusing on the current year's audit. So that's the key piece that we need to do, is make sure that we've got sufficient assurance over the current year transactions. We're in discussions with both internally. We've got a couple of pilot schemes which are going through where we're looking at other councils smaller than a unitary, to be fair, to see how we can undertake that work. Subject to the successful completion of those pilots, we will then roll that out more fully. That then depends upon the local authorities being able to commit time and resources to do that. And trying to roll that out in January, February time could be a challenge. So that's something that we need to talk to officers about as to when would be the time to do that. So what we may do is either do that in the first quarter of next year or look to do that as part of the 25-26 audit. We have to be cognizant that finance staff don't just work for the auditors. So surprising that may be.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've got two questions, please, for the auditor, and one for Adam Richards as well. For the auditors, you mentioned on page 42 of our pack, I think it's page 6 of your report, you talk about some, you haven't received any working papers from the council to commence a review on regarding housing benefit. I just wondered what the impact on your programme will be, or have you got, you know, some idea of when you're likely to get this information?
So we've had discussions with the finance team members and members of staff from the housing benefit team. It is causing, it could cause delays if we're unable to get that information in a timely way. We've been able to redeploy the resources to make sure that we've kept the rest of the audit going. But as we've set out with the Section 151 officer and finance officers, getting that information now is quite critical in order for us to complete the audit in that area in sufficient time.
Thank you. And the other question is similar because there's some concern about the revaluation exercise. And I guess we're talking about all the assets, and somewhere else in the report I happened to notice that the reconciliation process, not in this report maybe, I think it was probably in the risk report, there was an issue about the reconciliation of assets from the old paper system to the new asset system that's been put. And I just wondered what the impact on an audit would be, you know, if we're finding difficulty in identifying all our assets and what their values actually are. You know, how does that impact an audit?
Yeah, so we undertake a sample test on high risk assets. Assets we identify as high risk. That might be due to size, that might be due to differences, movements, unusual movements in valuation from the prior year, or for kind of other factors. So when we're reviewing those items, we will go back to source documentation. So we will make sure that we're able to receive all the supporting evidence. So back to floor plans or rental reports, that type of thing. So as part of our work, we'll look at a sample of items and make sure that we've got that audit trail from source documentation to what actually ends up in the financial statements in terms of the valuation. At this stage, we haven't identified any significant issues in respect to that, but our work is still in progress.
Thank you. And for Mr. Richards, and this report was extremely informative, I have to say. And I like the section in particular where you set out a number of questions which you feel may be appropriate for the Audit and Governance Committee. You'll probably be thankful. I will not be asking all of them this evening, but there are some really good points in there. Now, there was one point I picked up, and it was about the change in policy regards retention of business rates, and how that might affect the MTFP. And it's the first time I was aware that the government had a plan to do this. You know, it clearly has a significant effect on you know, the MTFP. But I just wondered, will be that taken account of in the next issue of the MTFP, or is it, or won't you do anything until you actually get some definitive policy from government?
So just to respond, we've issued a MTFP report, I think in May, July, and there is another one going to Overview and Scrutiny Committee next week for the end of October. In all three of those reports, I think there has been more or less of a conversation around the impact of the government's fair funding review. And clearly, you know, as part of that, you know, that has an impact on the amount of business rates that we get to keep locally as part of that process. So, you know, as the information around that has come out, we drip fed that into each one of those reports. But ultimately, it will be in the local government provisional finance settlement for 26-27 when we get a definitive position. You may recall that previously they were hoping to provide us that information in November. They never have provided it in November before in the past. But what they say, they've now delayed that into December because the Chancellor's budget was deferred from October to the end of November, and it can't be issued to us until after the Chancellor's budget. So in all likelihood, it's going to be Christmas Eve again that we get that information.
Sorry, can I just follow through with the question? What is the likely impact of that policy? Or has it already been addressed in the MTFP?
I think we recognise it as a risk in the MTFP because you don't really know until you know and you've got the final set of figures. Before that, there's a lot of assumptions, and we are in touch with national modelling agencies as to potentially what those assumptions and impact could be. But until you get the final position, you have to be prepared for fluctuations and risks. We know through the process that there was an intent for resources to move towards the north of the country rather than be retained in the south. And that was a clear message that came out. There was also a clear message around resources drifting away from London and the southeast. In all of that, we just have to be watchful. We have to accept those risks, plan for those risks, and potentially keep that modelling as tight as we can going into that process. But it's one that clearly we'll just keep a very close eye on. And next week, I'm sure it'll be something we discuss further in Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Councillor Armstrong.
First, I'd like to echo thank you for the report. It was really informative, and I really appreciated the questions as well, in terms of just helping you to delve a bit deeper and understand. But I just wanted to ask Mr. Richins a question, actually. So firstly, thank you for explaining a bit about the modelling, because that was one of my questions. But the other one is about the increase in council debt over the last, it says 60 years, like to see a 60% increase in council debt, and also seeing that roughly a fifth of council tax revenue is being spent on debt. I'm just wondering how that equates within the local context across BCP, whether you have any figures, and kind of for every pound of council tax that we're getting in, how much is being spent on the debt interest? And I'm putting that in terms as well of for our residents, like debt is an issue that's really increasing across the board. And I'm wondering how it's impacting us as a council. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I suppose for you, Chair, just to emphasise that these are national things that they draw out as part of this process. They're not local. And what we do is we provide regular benchmarking with regards to how we compare on debt compared to other unitary authorities. And in next week's report, which is already in the public domain, there is a table that sets out very clearly how we benchmark to other unitary authorities. I think it's fair to say that we're in the mid-range of compared to other unitary authorities. We are not one of the, if you like, extreme outliers. And if you looked at those extreme outliers, you'll see there's a great similarity between those local authorities and the ones that were on the list from the external auditor earlier with regards to those that got themselves into Section 114 territory. So there is that relationship between high indebtedness and potential financial exposure. We're in the mid-range as part of that. However, what we recognise in our medium-term financial plan and in our financial management going forward is that debt, the position we're in, is actually increasing most significantly because of the debt associated with the dedicated schools grant. We are having to fund that in the general fund. And we've made the case time and time again, we don't think that that was within the spirit and intent of government's first intention when it came to dedicated schools grant and high need blocks. So that is a point of continual, if you like, friction between us and the government, because we don't think it's something that we should be able to charge that interest at least to the dedicated schools grant and put it over there. But nevertheless, that is a conversation that's ongoing. And you'll be aware that last year I wrote to the government about this issue. This year I wrote to the government about this issue. I met with them in no, it's October. I met with them probably in September about it actually, and voiced my concerns again with regards to that impact that DSG debt is having on this council. Other than that, most of our debt is relatively, I think, comparable. By way of, it's in that mid-range. But what we have to recognise is that at least half of that overall debt total is because way back in 22-23, Bournemouth and Poole Council, under the government rules, had to buy themselves out of the HRA subsidy system. And to do that, we had to send them a big cheque of about £50 million. Poole did it and Bournemouth did it in order to buy them out of that system at that stage. So a lot of the debt is because of the arrangements government put in place through that mechanism, rather than engaging with, if you like, commercial activity. That's not to say that those previous authorities and this authority haven't done any commercial activities, because we have.
Just to jump in on that, do you think it would be possible, I'm sure it would be possible, but do you think it would be of value to other members to show pictorially that the way the debt is broken down like that? Do you think that's something that could be provided?
The one thing I'd say is you've got treasury management paper later, and some of that debt is explored as part of that paper. So, and some of that information is in that paper. So it might be something to reflect on
I am
later on the
conscious of that.
agenda.
I have often thought with the treasury management report, it would be useful to sort of see it broken down a little bit like that. I'm wondering if maybe when we come to that, we can think of it, because it's very useful. It was Councillor Tarling first, and then Councillor Cox, if that's all right.
Thank you very much. You've taken a nibble out of one of my sandwiches there, Chair. But just on the debt thing, and I know, because we do get a breakdown in the Treasury report and the various different interest rates we're paying, and it sort of made me think that the IMF has published a report for future growth in the UK, and the interest rates are going up potentially, a risk. Is there anything debt position wise we could look at? Are we in a position to refinance any of our debts, or are they all fixed at the moment? I know I'm probably going straight into, as you've just mentioned, into the Treasury report there, but I'm sort of concerned that this is another train coming down the tracks that was mentioned this week by the IMF.
Most of our debt is on a fixed term basis, with the exception of the debt associated with DSG, because we are generally keeping that short term, because the government told us when we set the 25-26 budget that they were looking to return the SEND system to financial sustainability in 2025. Now, when I look at the calendar, I think actually there's not much left of 2025 for them to achieve that objective. But that's the reason we're keeping it short, because they told us they would return the system to financial sustainability. What that looks like, we don't yet know, but we do know that there might be something that is inferred or discussed as part of that provisional local government settlement in December.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind the committee that the administration did reduce massively the ceiling in which we can take debt, and actually brought in a procedure whereby any increases comes to this committee and is approved of here. So, we are very risk averse in that respect.
Do you think it would be useful for the committee to write a letter in support of what you've been arguing around the debt interest on the DSG grant? I know that you've had multiple meetings and representations, but it's just something to suggest.
Thank you for the suggestion. I think it's something that officers are reflecting on quite soon, so it might be something that we take away and maybe come back to you. The leader has previously written, I've written, it's about, just trying to keep getting that message across. So that, if we can take that back and then feed back to you at a later point.
Yeah. I mean, I personally would be supportive of setting a letter out arguing the case for why the debt interest should be part of what is excluded by the statutory instrument. So maybe we can sort of come back to this at a time when you think it would be appropriate. So did you have your hand up, Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you, Chair. It is part of this conversation. I don't suppose at this moment in time, Mr. Richards, you can make any predictions about council tax levels, or you, Councillor Cox. Yeah, because I think given kind of saying what Chair is saying about setting out pictorially, so that it's easily understood by residents, if we're looking at increasing council tax, how much of that increase will be taken up with paying debt interest, and how can we communicate that to our residents?
If I may, with regards to council tax increases, what we have to remember that the government strategy for funding local services increases, whether that's increases in demand or increases in cost, is through council tax increases. And they've made that clear policy year upon year upon year, that we, if you like, we tax locally as opposed to nationally in order to finance, if you like, the activities of local authorities. So, as part of the medium-term financial plan, that is based on what the government would expect us to increase council tax by, and they would expect us to increase tax by 4.99% in each of the next 3 years. That is our expectation. If we do that, and then we say we haven't got enough money to fund local services, they'll say, but we gave you the power to increase council tax by 4.99 and you didn't do it. That was your choice. So, it's very clear statement of intent as to all councils as to what we should be increasing council tax by, and that is what's currently underpinning our financial strategy.
And there was at least 1 year where the 4.99% increase didn't happen, wasn't it? It was 22-23, and that was a conscious choice made not to, and there were consequences of that with the best value notice. Am I right?
Well, I don't think the consequence of that was the best value notice. But you're right, a previous administration of this authority did not increase council tax by the maximum it could have done in that year. And clearly, every year upon year upon year upon year, we're not getting the benefit of that increase, and therefore you could argue that there is that gain to our local council taxpayers, but with regards to the financing of the council and what we can achieve and what we can do, is obviously limited by that lesser amount of resources coming in.
Councillor Cox.
And just to be completely transparent, we have written to the government and asked them that could we increase by more to counteract that reduction, and they refused.
That's new information. That's very interesting. That was going to be my follow-up question. Thank you. That's Andrews.
Yeah, just a quick point. Obviously CPI is mentioned quite a lot, but I tend to prefer or look at RPI. And last time I did check it, back in August, it was about 4.75% increase over the past 12 months. A big jump compared with the previous 12 months. And that cancels out more or less the 4.99% we got anyway. So although it's capped at 4.99%, it's precious little increase, a net increase that we get due to high inflation at the moment.
Chair, if I can come back, one of the things I make reference to in my financial management reports, I think it was a statement by the Local Government Association or some national body, I might be referring to the wrong one, that said with regards to the 25-26 council tax increase of 4.99%, the amount you generated, at least 60% of that was used to fund the government's national insurance increase, either directly or indirectly, net of the grant that they gave us.
Question from me, looking at page 48 of our pack, common challenges for councils include gaps in risk management, high vacancy rates in internal audit, decentralised contract management, under-supported project management. And it would be really helpful from external audit to get a little bit of a picture about how BCP compares. Obviously, there's clearly these huge national challenges. Could you add a little bit of colour for us as to how severely BCP is being hit by some of them compared to other councils you see? I appreciate that's quite wide ranging, so it's more of a question as to how worried you think we should be compared to other councils.
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat the question?
It's just your reflection on in the lessons from auditors' annual reports. It's quite clear that there's some serious challenges facing local authorities nationally, and some of them are. It paints quite a bleak picture, doesn't it, about the vacancy rates and some of the issues. I'm wondering if you have any general broad comments on how BCP is faring compared to other local authorities. I don't want to put you on the spot for something too general and too vague, but it'd be useful to get a sense of how alarmed we should be by some of these.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's sort of a mixed response, really, isn't it? And I think one of the things that I would refer you to is the value for money report that we're bringing to the next audit committee there. And again, what we're trying to do is make sure that as part of the learning from the 23-24 audits across all bodies, we're bringing an assessment of how BCP compares to those. There will be some elements where it is relevant to BCP, but I think there are other elements where actually the council is performing well and actually is trying to be on the front foot. As the new engagement lead here, I've been quite impressed with the proactive nature of some of the arrangements that I've seen from the statutory officers, and I think that's encouraging from our perspective. I think there are some real challenges, as we've already said, around the financial position, the reserves, the DSG position that the council has got. But actually what we're seeing, and my challenge back to my own VFM team is, okay, so we're saying that the council needs to reduce its DSG, but what actions has it already taken, and what are we seeing that they aren't doing that others are doing? So that's a piece of work that my team are going back to check on. So yes, some of their elements will compare, but actually I see that BCP is quite a long way down the route, but more detailed commentary will be coming in the VFM report.
Thank you, that's helpful. Do we have any more questions while we have the external auditors here? Well, with that, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for coming down to being with us in person. It's much appreciated, and we look forward to hearing from you in November. Thank you. So, the report recommendation is that Audit and Governance Committee notes the external auditor's progress to date in delivering their responsibilities and the sector update provided. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on to item number 7, Treasury Management Monitoring Update for Quarter 2, 2025-26. Mr. Filmer, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Audit and Governance Committee. So this is the usual quarterly update on our Treasury Management position, which normally starts with an economic update and also where we're looking in terms of our interest rate forecasts. Now, since I presented Quarter 1, the Bank of England reduced their base rate to 4%. And you'll see in table 1 of the report that the general consensus amount amongst economists is that we're likely to see a reduction in March 2026, so a few months off until we see another reduction. Now, I peddle this line every time I come along and give a quarterly update. It's about how that bank rate has not kept in pace in terms of the borrowing levels that the council can access. And I've tried to set that out in table 2. There's a graph that shows the PWLB rates that the council can access in terms of its borrowing rate and what the base rate's done. And you can see in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, the trajectory is widened. And that's what I just want to illustrate, that government debt is getting more and more expensive, which means local authority debt's more and more expensive, despite the Bank of England reducing its interest rate. And of course, we've talked a lot about debt, but clearly that's very important for us as an authority with a large amount of debt to manage. So moving on to our Treasury Management performance against our budget, it remains the same as what we set out in Quarter 1, so a £300,000 underspend, and that's in relation to our interest payable budgets in terms of our short-term arrangements, about to secure them cheaper than what we expected. Table 4 sets out our cancelled borrowing position as at the end of September. So we had £111 million of short-term borrowing as at the end of September. So short-term borrowing is anything that's 12 months or less in terms of its duration. And our long-term borrowing was £248 million. There was a question earlier around refinancing of debt. We did refinance a loan, the Phoenix Life loan last year, September, which knocked off just over 0.5%, and that saved the authority £19 million over the life of that loan. So we do actively look at where we can in terms of restructuring the debt. And table 5 shows our investments at the end of September stood at £10 million, which is, for an authority of our size, low, but it illustrates our position in terms of our cash. And lastly, in terms of training, I did mention it last time I came along. I think we've got a date that we've penciled in, so hopefully it'll be going in your diaries very soon. So I'll stop there, Chair. Happily take any questions.
Can I just add congratulations on the restructuring of the debt? And I think you should get commended for that that work that's saving so much. Thank you. Councillor Slade online.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions on the charts. Apologies, I'm looking to one side because I've got the charts on the screen. You said that the cost of PWL borrowing is going up. Obviously, we've got a lot of short-term debt, which I'm assuming we refinance because I can't see that we've got anywhere in here about repaying it. So is the cost of the debt or the borrowing from other local authorities going up in the same way, or are they linked more to base rates, and therefore where do we see that heading? And secondly, some of our long-term borrowing with PWBL is not that long-term. It's less than 5 years. So I'm wondering whether there's a risk that we need to be banking more going forward in terms of that debt. And finally, do we always plan to refinance the debt, or do we ever repay any of it?
For you, Chair. Sorry, I was just making some notes of those questions. So the local authority market, where you'll see all our short-term borrowing has been taken out, tends to mirror the PWLB rates, so what we can access from government via the Treasury. There's normally a few basis points between them, but it tends to mirror it. Sometimes it's a little bit cheaper, sometimes it's a bit more expensive. It's just the way the market works. In terms of the 5-year repayment, I might just need to remind myself what loan that is and where it sits in terms of, is it a general fund or a HRA loan?
HRA.
HRA. So the HRA borrowings Adam referenced as part of the self-financing. It is built into their business plan, the HRA business plan, in terms of how they will service that debt, be it repay it or take out on another loan to replace it. So that's something that's in the HRA business plan. And then I think the last question was around, was it repayment of?
Yeah, and I wonder whether all this short-term borrowing, obviously we in none of it have we paid anything back. So do we never pay anything back? Do it just, and if we don't pay anything back, why are we borrowing it? But normally you borrow something to do something and then you pay it back. But if we just keep rolling it, would it not be better just to take a long-term loan and just then pay that back over a long period?
Yeah, I think I get the crux of your question. So at the moment, our strategy is to carry out short-term borrowing because of that PWB risk, and that's what we've been advised to carry on doing. At a point, and you'll see the forecast in the table, let's hope that that PWB rate will come down. So we will replace the short-term borrowing with long-term borrowing from PWLB, and that then takes out the interest rate risks that we currently carry with the short-term borrowing.
Councillor Waite.
Thank
Hiya.
you.
My question is related to Councillor Slade. So just to kind of build on that, is the market being less competitive now because there is more demand for borrowing? I mean, I would have thought that sort of years ago when authorities sort of more of them had reserves, the market almost kind of needed to be a bit more attractive to, you know, have some cheap money is better spent it today and, you know, catch up in the future. But is it that? Is that we've got a kind of a misbalance of borrowers and lenders, and it worries me that this is going to kind of self-perpetuate. Do you see what I mean? I'm not explaining.
So the local authority market where we borrow from definitely has seen a reduction in the supply over the last few years, and demand shot up. And it's because of reasons like the DSG deficit that councils are having to borrow to service that revenue expenditure. And that has pushed up rates at certain points of the time. So cash tends to be quite tight towards the end of the financial year, and local authorities take advantage of that. What we're also seeing is some local authorities will not lend to other local authorities based on their name. So where we've seen councils that have taken out Section 114, they're almost blacklisted. And that then just takes out confidence in the market as well, so there's less supply.
Chair, if I may just come in on top of that, with regards to the interest rates that we pay, I think what we have to recognise that global or macroeconomic factors have a huge impact on actually the rate of interest that we face. What's happening internationally with regards to the tariff culture that we get into, the potential political and potential wars that are happening, all of that starts to kind of spook the markets, and all of that tends to drive up that interest rate. Counter to that is also what's happening with the stock market. If suddenly people stopped investing in the stock market overnight, they might suddenly start investing in like government debt because they see it more secure, and that would actually push the rate of that debt probably downwards, because you'd have to offer it less interest to attract them to give you their money as part of that process. So it's just recognizing that it is part of that bigger picture, and it has a significant impact on the rates that we can secure, whether that's through PWOB or through other local authorities.
Does that mean BCP will benefit from a stock market collapse? Not thought of it like that before. Yeah, scary. Yeah, go for it, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to be talking about the DSG and the risk paper later on, but when I looked at it, I couldn't, and we just mentioned how we borrowed £57 million or whatever it was to help us cash flow the deficit because we're paying for it. So where do I see that in here? Because I understand that was temporary borrowing. So is it in the short term or is it in the long term? Part of this, or do you have to report it because the government have given you this sort of authority to borrow it temporarily? And I suppose linked to that, probably encroaching upon the discussion later on, but I wondered about the Treasury limit for borrowing, whether that had been affected by the need to borrow that £57 million. So it's sort of related to them. What sort of prompted it? Because I couldn't see when in the chart when the borrowing was actually initiated. You can only see when it's got to be repaid. And I just wondered if it would be useful to either put the term in there or when the borrowing was actually taken out, so we could see. But I can't see £57 million in there. Obviously, unless it's all going into a big pot and you just, you're just taking it out of the big pot. I don't know how it works exactly.
In an attempt to answer your question, I draw you to table 4 on page 4 of the report, 66 of the pack. And in there you have short-term borrowings, and you have, that we've taken out £111 million worth of short-term borrowing as of the 30th of September 2025. A substantial amount of that will be to be supporting our DSG deficit. Okay, so it's part of that, and I take the point about the maturity dates. It doesn't actually necessarily tell you when it started, and that's something we can take away and reflect on. I was reflecting on a member in this room earlier today with regards to a debt we took on that finishes in 2068, but is at 1.55%. So we took that debt on, I think, in 2022, 50-year debt. What we would give for those rates today, and at the time we were talking about negative interest rates, would you believe it? And taking out 1.55 felt maybe potentially expensive if we were going to go into negative territory. But here we are in a blink of an eye later, and suddenly securing debt at 5 to 6%, is the norm. And you think to yourself, if only I'd taken out another 50 or 60 million then at 1.5%,
Yeah, bought some more beach.
Hindsight's wonderful, isn't it?
Can I suggest an item maybe for the action tracker to try an appendix to the next Treasury Monitoring Report, where we try a few diagrams to help us help us picture this breakdown. I don't want to put you to too much trouble, but I feel like a little bit of how the debt is broken down between DSG, between as you say, from the creation of BCP, those, just to try and help us get them in proportion. I found this when we were looking at the Pool Museum borrowing increase. My first question was, well, how does it compare to other loans we have, other borrowing? And the answer is very, very little, but it's helpful just to have that. So maybe we can take that offline to talk about what would be a resource appropriate way of you presenting some charts to us in the next pack. Would that be helpful? And perhaps committee members can suggest through me what they would like to see, and we can see if that would be achievable without too much resource. Councillor Desmond.
Well, you were mentioning table 4, and it's probably a question because I'm not usually on this committee. I haven't been on one of these committees since the Iceland banking crisis. But when I see down here who we're borrowing from, Islington, yeah, that sounds good. PCC for Hampshire, is that what it sounds like?
The Police and Crime Commission, yeah.
How, well, I'm amazed. How have they got money to lend to us?
Robbing the coppers.
All I'd say is that's a question you'll have to ask them and their financial advisors.
Yes, I may well.
My final reflection on this, unless others obviously want to come in, is it seems to me that there's a strong control framework, and you're managing the loans actively, and obviously you're restructuring as you can. So it sounds to me as though you're doing everything that can be done to manage that debt appropriately. Is there anything else that could be done other than just carrying on what you're doing and trying to restructure where you can?
The thing I would say is probably reflecting back on the earlier conversation, which we're going to have a management reflection on where we are with the DSG and SEND, and about whether or not we need to take further action by way of potential letters to MPs and to government. And I'll take into that conversation, the suggestion that the Audit and Governance Committee would be prepared, if it would help, to actually put some weight behind a letter to government. So that's something we'll take away and consider, I think.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? No? Well, thank you very much for that. The report recommendation is the Audit and Governance Committee notes the reported activity of the Treasury Management function for April to September 2025. Do we have consensus to note the report?
Agree.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 8. This is the one you're going to be leaving for us for. Hopefully not too long. We'll come and find you when we're finished with this item. Procurement and Contract Management Delivery Plan Progress Report by Mr. Stuart Dickel. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of files just to share and talk through as we go through, so I'll just share my screen.
Welcome, Councillor Hannah, also.
Sorry for the delay. Right, there we go. So to start with, I'll just talk through the report very briefly that you've got. The context of the report is that BCP Cabinet signed off the procurement and contract management strategy last September 24, and section 5 of that strategy has got requirements for 6-monthly update to audit and governance on the delivery plan that sits behind the strategy. So the strategy's got 57 commitments in there that we're going to deliver over a 4-year period, and the strategy is silent on the dates or the priorities for when those things are going to be delivered. So the delivery plan gives you better sight of how that's coming on.
So the recommendation in here, it's I'll just come down to that. There's two parts of it. One is just to note the update. The other is to consider an approval mechanism for refining KPIs. What I've not noted on there is that my recommendation is that that's delegated to procurement board. So procurement board does meet every month, and that's I think it would help us to refine the measures over time if that were delegated. So that's that piece. I'll skip over to the slides and talk you through those. So before I get to the slides, I just wanted to share this one as well. If I get that onto presentation. There. So I'm sure everyone's aware that government introduced the Procurement Act 23 went live in February this year, February 25, and that changes quite significantly. Certainly the transparency side of what we do. It's all the same good rules still apply. There's very strong governance around procurement, but it certainly improves the transparency. The number of notices that we have to put into the public domain goes significantly higher. That gives government loads of macro data about councils that they can do much more reporting on. So there is a benefit, and that helps government to consider how to shape things better to help suppliers and the market. So that all went live earlier in the year, and we're doing okay there. The hot on the heels of it going live in July, government launched a consultation about further reforms to public sector procurement, and there were 11 questions that they were asking as part of that consultation, and the themes that those questions covered I've got on that slide. So it's generally speaking across the country, could we do more with public sector procurement to spend more with SMEs, VCSEs? Can we do more with prompt payments to help supply chains? Around the flexibility that we've got for people-related services, could government do more with introducing more flexibility to help that side of the business? The fourth bullet point on here I was particularly interested in, actually, and this relates to how we make decisions. Any authority obviously makes decisions about, do we insource something or do we outsource it? And they're referring to this as publishing again into the public domain a public interest test about is it right that we're either insourcing or outsourcing? I think that definitely has got massive transparency benefits. And then on social value as well, at the moment you've got authorities all across the country reinventing the wheel, probably unnecessarily. That there are national models, and that yes, so I fully support a standard way of doing things. I have responded to that consultation, and the kind of summary of all of the questions is yes, as a country, I believe we could be doing more. Obviously, doing more does have a resource impact as well, so it would be silly not to consider that. And the LGA is preparing that sector-wide response. So that's just the update in terms of what's going on with public regulations on procurement. So moving into the update on the 57 commitments. This is the dashboard just in terms of how things are coming on. So I've prioritised those commitments in terms of high, medium and low, and they are well, the top pie chart is showing you that of that 57, 29 are in progress, 29 complete, 19 in progress and 9 not started. When you look into the detail below that, the high priority ones, 17 are complete, 8 in progress. Everything that's high priority is either in progress or complete, nothing that's not started. Medium,
there's more of a shift to a balance between either complete or in progress, with a few not started yet, and then the lower priority ones is where you're seeing more that haven't yet been started. So that's the summary. You are due to see a report, an update like this every 6 months, but this is the first one. So acknowledging that it is 6 months late coming to you, but it's taken a bit of development work to get to this point. So the strategy itself has got there are 9 measures that I believe it came from Audit and Governance, requested those 9 measures, and so these next slides reflect what I was given to report back to Audit and Governance. This is it's a subset of KPIs. There's a full KPI set that I deliver to Procurement Board every month, and that's got around 20 metrics that I'm reporting on there. And this just looks at 9 of those, the 9 that have been requested. So the first slide, and it relates to a concern that was raised, is when we're extending contracts, are they justified in terms of supplier performance, or is there also a situation of where people are coming to the procurement team so late in the day that we've got no option but to extend it? And the analysis that we're doing there, the way we're measuring it, is showing that actually we're not being backed into a corner, and so we are being engaged sufficiently early that we can make good decisions around that. And supplier performance is where you would want it to be. We're not extending contracts with suppliers that are not performing adequately. So that's the first one. I'm pleased to say that's in a good state in terms of performance. The second one is certainly not giving you a 100% story, but not entirely surprising. So if we just look at this is looking at year to date. So if we just look at the September figures, what that's telling you is that on 2% of occasions, clients are coming to us too late, that we feel as a team that our options for procurement are compromised because we haven't been given enough time. But overall, I feel that 2% is acceptable.
Sorry to jump in. I usually would wait to the end, but could you give us an example of a situation where that might come up? What kind of contract, what kind of procurement would you be talking about?
In terms of where so what it tends to be, there's a couple of reasons why it can happen. So we've got all of our contract data on the contracts register, 560 live contracts currently. And the way the data is entered onto the register, contract review dates have to be set. And on occasions, there have been temps in our team who have not set those review dates early enough, and that has caused an issue. On other occasions, the review date has been perfectly good enough. We've had the reminders through, we've prompted it to the service teams, and they've just been too late coming forward so they're taking it away, they're considering it, but that consideration is not happening quick enough. It could happen for any sort of contract. It's not works contracts, but it's any type of goods or services. The next one here, it's an interesting slide. This one, it doesn't really. So I was asked to report back on how frequently are we doing preliminary market engagement to warm up the market and get market feedback on how we could go to market differently. And the big consideration here is it's not always proportionate or relevant to do early market engagement, the preliminary market engagement. And so when you look at the number that have come through the team since April again, there's actually only one of that 60 where it was deemed to be relevant and proportionate to do the preliminary market engagement. Where it was, we've done it. So there aren't others where we felt it should have happened, but we've not done it. it's simply a case of, was it relevant to do it, or would it just be a disproportionate approach to going to market? So, and you can see the note that I've put on there. I'm saying that we're presenting this really for information only. It doesn't really indicate good or bad performance. The next one on here speaks to how many corporate contracts we've got. So where we've got corporate contracts in place, and so there's currently in excess of 40, so between 40 and 50. But that number, which I think is 46, that number is 46 out of 90 that we have identified. So ideally, I'd be able to sit here and say as a company, we've got 90 corporate contracts and frameworks that people across the business can buy from. We're not there yet, and I did have a target. The aspirational target would be to be at 95% of everything that we've identified. We've actually got contracts there for. But board has reminded me that we need to work within the resources that we've got, and board doesn't feel, and I completely agree, it's not realistic or achievable to say we're going to have all 90 in place given the current level of resourcing. So so that one I am reporting as amber.
Just to come in to check my understanding of that, is this where you're saying that it's better to go to a provider that provides a number of different parts of the service that you want done? It works out better to go to one large company to deliver a range of pieces of work than to go to multiple separate contracts. Is that?
No, that's not the way this breaks down. It's the so what this really tells a story of is where we don't have a corporate contract in place, it means that people across the authority that are all buying the same thing. So for example, we could make it about bottles of water, silly example. But if you've got people across the authority that all want to buy bottles of water, and they're all going out buying them off contract, or there might be some multiple small contracts in place, but generally speaking, by now we've dealt with those. We've had 6 years to deal with the multiple similar contracts, and most of those have gone. So it tends to be about off-contract buying. And so we've identified another 50 odd areas where there is off-contract buying going on, where if we could get contracts in place, then we would expect to leverage better pricing. The suppliers are able to grow their businesses because they've got the surety of the business. I can see a question.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're sort of touching on the other side of that coin was about external frameworks and procuring through external frameworks, and I sort of see that's sort of what this slide 82 is covering some of that. Is that correct?
This slide's no. Again, this slide is actually frameworks that we own as a company. So this isn't about using frameworks that the professional buying organisations own. This is where we've got our own. We control our own.
So I have to declare an interest. I work for a company that works on a number of local authority frameworks, of which, as far as I know, we're not engaged in this authority. But well, I work in an office that's Hampshire County Council framework office. Is that something that you consider in the procurement thing, is using a multi public sector procurement framework?
We regularly use frameworks that are owned and operated by the professional buying organisations. Yeah. So Crown Commercial Services, ESPO, WIPO, we use those regularly.
Okay.
But they're not always the best fit for BCP, and there's many instances where we would want to have our own framework so that we're more able to make it attractive to SMEs and local suppliers if we own it and we tailor it to our own needs. So it supports the local market. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. The third-party spend or procurement process was one of the main threads of the transformation programme, and presumably the output from this process, it would have been part of the transformation programme. Is that right?
So the transformation program certainly informed all the development work that's been going on in procurement over the last few years. It wasn't adopted kind of as drawn up by KPMG. We certainly scrutinised and we participated in all that, but also everything that KPMG did worked with PCR 15, the Public Contract Regulations 2015, whereas of course we've now moved to Procurement Act 23. So the operating framework needed to change anyway to reflect the change in regs.
Can I come back again, Chair, on that? Yeah. So presumably the aim will still be to provide frameworks for the whole organisation to lock into, because presumably that will make the procurement system more efficient.
Absolutely.
And therefore there is potential for reducing costs of the council.
Yeah, very much so.
So presumably there is a programme of work looking at this with some kind of project management about how you're going to aim to achieve the goals of that. So, you know, how is that managed? How, you know, is there a team looking at to see how you can produce these frameworks to make them more comprehensive so we can reduce costs? What is the process for it?
So we've got there are three like master category managers that report to me, and they all have a number of directorates that are their client directorates. They engage regularly with the heads of service across those directorates to map what's in their pipelines. We then look for synergies across all those across the three different categories. Where there's synergies, then we put those together as corporate contracts, and we aim to resource them so that we can take those out to market and get those frameworks in place. In terms of savings, I suspect you're alluding to the savings piece. So in terms of realising cashable savings through that kind of procurement activity, it gets more difficult to cash those savings, and because then that's where we start getting into it's a little bit of people's activity across multiple services, multiple directorates. So in terms of how would you actually reduce a budget to cash those savings, that becomes quite a challenge, and it tends to be that the people in those services end up with a little bit more time to do other things that add value rather than those savings being taken.
Chair, if I may just come in at that point, just as a bit of a reminder, when KPMG did their piece of work, they were looking at procurement and commissioning as a function. And clearly what Stuart is here to talk about is the procurement and contract management. So it's a subset of that bigger piece of work they were looking at. You know, this committee may be aware that we closed down our, if you like, our main transformation program we've had running since 2019. We closed that down at the end of 24-25. But what it's left us with is a number of what I call service-specific transformation programs. So these have been agreed by full council. We had one that was focused on children's services. We've had several that are looking at adult social care, you know, and some of those are focusing on the commissioning function within those services, because you know, as a council, you know, clearly the majority, a significant proportion of our spend are on the commissioning for both children in care and adults that need our support. So those commissioning functions, you know, we're investing in those as part of a transformation program, and in our medium-term financial plan, that will be predicated on savings from those processes. So it's all sort of connected.
Okay, so next slide for me is on local contracts. Now I know that this is one local spend, SME spend, local contracts all does attract a fair bit of attention, quite rightly. And it's also fair to say that nationally, the three areas that are identified as being significant areas of improvement for many councils where there's a strong focus is around increasing local spend, increasing social value, and improving contract management. Those are the three that come up a lot. So this slide currently is showing you the count of local contracts. It's not showing you the value of those contracts, but it's got the count of them. Now, in the note on the right hand side though, that actually comes from spend data as well, the Tussle and Local Gov report. So that's I'm going to talk about that as well. So I've reported this one as amber, but since putting these slides together, I've actually done some further research that might change your perspective on that, and it's a conversation that I'll be having with the board next month. So the Tussle and Local Gov independent report shows that our local spend is at 39%, and that puts us, 169th out of 311 councils. Copilot suggests that the average is 47% of contracts. So when you compare our performance of 38, 39% against 47, that doesn't look so good. The research that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks is actually looking at the impact of being a coastal community on our supply base, and again going back to interrogating Copilot on what we can find out of that. Copilot's suggesting that our target, so currently our target for green would be greater than 45%, and Copilot is saying that actually a target between 35 and 42% is more realistic for BCP, given its restrictive geography. So it's not reflected on this slide at the moment, but it's something to just be aware of. It rather changes what I was going to say this evening from when I put the slides together.
We have a question from Councillor Slade online.
Thank you. So I hear what you say, and obviously, when you've only got land on around one side, then I can see why a coastal community would be worse. I suppose my question is, who set the target of 45%? Because in terms of 45%, that's still the majority of our contracts going beyond county-wide. And surely, even though we only have one way to go, our aspiration for working with local businesses would be greater, because it's just the right thing to do. So who set it? Why was it set at that level? And is there an ambition to extend it? And finally, I suppose of course there are going to be organisations that are way outside of our area because certain businesses don't trade in our area. But is there a specific reason for of certain types of contracts that we're never going to be able to break through? Because I hear where you're coming from, but I probably reject it on the basis that 45% is still very low. And as an administration, I know we were certainly keen to target a much greater level, and where is the trajectory going is really what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so the target of 45% is currently set in relation to the average of 47% of being the English Council's average, just to get us to a position where we're not in the lower half. These targets weren't set by that, they weren't described within the strategy, and they weren't described in the measures that were added to the strategy to be reported back to audit and governance, and this it comes back to the recommendation where I was asking that procurement board would be able to refine not just the KPIs, but actually also the targets that I've introduced as well, so that we are being realistic about where those targets should be set.
Can I just come back and just ask the question, if the average is 47%, why would we as an organisation not want to at least set our target to be at the average prior to knowing what you know about the coastal piece? I don't understand why we would aim for something that's not even average. That I'd have thought, 1% above the average would be at least a bare minimum, but that's perhaps a bit over competitive.
Well, no, I think it's perfectly like noble aspiration to get us up into the top quartile, but it's also about trying to be realistic and considering what's achievable. And given where we are currently at 38%, and it is stretching us to get us from 38% to 45. I do still feel that is quite a stretch. And I don't want to, I hadn't wanted to put something on here that was unrealistic.
Can I just check my understanding as well? Is there a trade-off between wanting it to be local and also just wanting to make sure you've got the best provider, and for certain specialist services, and you want the most competitive prices? So I can imagine, because of so much done, working remotely now, that it might be that the most competitive and specialist service we want is elsewhere. Is that a trade-off? Or
there is a trade-off, and one that I've read about is actually, so when you again come back to that Tussle and local gov report, whilst it shows that we're below average on local, we're above average on both SMEs and social value. And the trade-off that gets described is that where we're factoring in requirements for social value, the local market potentially suffers, because the bigger companies that are more likely based somewhere else, they are better versed, and they rehearse this more regularly about how they put bids together that are stronger on the social value offering. So to combat that, I would need to do more outreach work to local suppliers to improve how they understand social value and how they respond to those questions. And I'll bring it back to, this is year one of the 4-year strategy, and trying to keep the targets realistic for where we are at the moment. It's not to say that we can't move the targets as we improve. That's where I would have thought we would have been.
Councillor Hannah is online first.
Yeah, thank you. As the portfolio holder, I meet with Stuart once a month. Tends to be following the procurement board meeting. And I met with him on Tuesday, and he took me through these same slides. And as it happens, when we got to this slide, I asked him exactly the same question that Vicky asked. And I must admit, I was quite satisfied with Stuart's answer. There is a sense in which the target could be to achieve absolute maximum all contracts. But it seemed to me that given where we're at, Stuart's target seemed a reasonable target, as one that is potentially achievable, even though Stuart himself says that it is challenging. And I think the other comment I add is that Stuart did indicate earlier that in terms of capacity within his team, that sadly is limited by the number of staff in his team. And I know that he would like to do more, but needs more capacity to achieve that. And that's something which in current financial circumstances is difficult to achieve. So I didn't query him quite as strongly. I thought the target was appropriate, but I'm also satisfied that the procurement board is the right place where a target might be adjusted. I would suggest hopefully Stuart can work towards achieving this one, and at that point, the target then gets pushed up a little higher. But thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I can't believe I say this because it actually goes against my principles, but I think we've just heard about the financial aspects of it, and if it came down to paper clips from Biddle Trentide at a certain point, which has got a lot of social value attached to it, or we can spend 1/10 of the money with paper clips from Pyongyang. That's a decision to make. So there is a policy guidance document here for some of these KPIs, and to take Councillor Slade's point about the local buy, well, if we can't buy it locally, why do we want to, or it's more costly to buy it locally, then why are we doing that? If we can buy it, cheaper off Amazon, or why do we need a special contract for it? So I just remind members that, you know, this is the balance we strike. How important is social value to us as a council, and how important is the localism thing? And you know, I'm currently working on a project where we're billions of pounds is being spent locally in East Anglia because that's what, you know, we said to the government we were going to do, but it doesn't mean that you actually get best value. It can be contrary balances here, the best value and the other aims.
And is it better to go with paperclips supplied by somebody elsewhere in the country who has an absolutely excellent sort of ethical processes and sourcing and everything, compared to somebody locally who hasn't developed that? It is very, very difficult, isn't it? Okay, carry on.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide then. So SME contracts, that's I've pretty much spoken to that slide already from what we were saying a moment ago. So we are performing at 52% there, whereas the English Council average is 38, so significantly better. So I'll just move on from that one. I'm assuming there's probably no questions on that one. Social value, where again, where it's relevant and proportionate, it does get factored into 100% of our contracts, I'm pleased to say. So we are doing well there. And this only looks at the contracts that come through the central team. So if it's a contract value estimated to be above 30,000, then that comes through our central team. And at that point, we make sure that we are factoring in the 10% on social value, as long as it is relevant and proportionate. So again, that's in a good place. And the last slide just really acknowledges that the committee was asking for 9 measures to be reported every 6 months, but I'm actually only reporting 7 of that 9 this evening, and we are still under development on 2 of those KPIs. One is that differentiation between on-contract and off-contract spend, and the other is on savings and how they're measured. The savings one has been a topic of conversation with Procurement Board a number of times over the last 12 months, and the on and off contract spend one, that has got people working on that, both from IT and financial systems team, to work on a solution to make sure we've got the data to be able to report that. So the actively in development on KPI 1, and Board is reflecting regularly on what KPI 20 looks like.
Thank you. Just going back to the social value one, from what you said previously, do you have a plan in place to upskill local businesses on their applications, of, demonstrating social value, and I suppose SME, promoting with local SMEs? Is that something there's an actual plan for, and like a road show or something, or training or something like that?
There will be, yes. It's not in year 1 of delivery, and off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you if it's in year 2 of the delivery. We're focused initially on delivering everything that there's a statutory requirement to get over the line. In terms of developing social value for BCP, there is a social value statement that has been drafted and is going to CMP Cabinet start of November. Before that moves on its journey forward through BCP after that. Once that statement is in place, then that's going to give us a better framework about how we engage with local suppliers. So that, in terms of stepping stones, that's the first one that we need to get in place.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Desmond.
Well, I've only got a comment, which is a bit like Councillor Tarling's, in that all of this is very, very praiseworthy. But I feel that with the council in the state it's in, it's a bit like me. If I'm pushed for, finance, I like to go to the butcher in Highcliffe, but I have to go to Lidl because it's, and I just hope that we're not doing this because we want to go to the butcher in Highcliffe. Totally agree. I think it's wonderful. My boys have got small and medium enterprises, so yeah, jolly good. But I still feel that there has to be the best value. I'm sure it's in here, but I think that's at the moment imperative, as it is with me. I'm always in Lidl's at the moment.
Yeah, so just to respond to that one. So absolutely, the value for money piece is front and centre of all award criteria. More often than not, it's always a balance between price and quality, and that will reflect the factors that sit behind that in terms of, are there quality risks, are there financial risks, and it's procurement working with the client team that will work out where those criteria sit in terms of that weighting, so that the authority is getting what it wants.
And will we have KPI 1 and KPI 20 for the next 6 monthly update?
I sincerely hope so.
Well, while you're here, I have a related question. Oh, sorry, we have online the independent person, Lindy.
Good evening. I just wanted to know about the KPIs. Do you benchmark against other local authorities about these KPIs? And where will it be reported? Is this part of the performance plan of the municipality, or just as part of this report? Thank you.
So the main ones that are currently being benchmarked against other authorities are the social value, SME spend and local spend, because we benefit from that Tussle local gov report that looks at those metrics for every council.
I assume
Thank you.
that is good. Thank you. Yeah, I just have one related question. This has come up from residents, as particularly small traders, and the interface for applying, and finding that onerous. How does that world and the IT and the process for small traders and that the process they have to go through, and I suppose the process generally that anyone has to go through, how does that sit compared to your work?
Okay, so there's two if not three parts of my answer to that. So being public sector, we must do digital bids. Everything has to be fully electronic. Regulations state that. There are other requirements of the regulations that set out how we communicate with the market, and what has to go on national platforms and what doesn't. So that can seem very onerous to local small traders, but we have to apply the national regulations. Where we can simplify stuff, we do. We're certainly not trying to make anything sound or feel more bureaucratic and complicated than it needs to be. The next part of answering that is around concessions rather than procurements. So, and I know that concessions is one that generates some conversation with local operators who wish to sell particularly food and drink around seafront. And the way we go to market with those it will be dependent on the value of the turnover of what's expected. So again, the regulations kick in. The threshold for concessions considers it's not about how much income does the council get. It's the turnover of that business over the entire period of the life of the contract. It's what is it worth to the operator. So for a kiosk selling £200,000 worth of product over a year, they're hitting £1 million after 5 years, obviously, and so that's concessions work entirely on the basis of sales revenue turnover. So we have to follow the regulations on that as well. Where it's significantly below that threshold, then we don't have to advertise things on a national platform, and we can do it more locally. There's also been some confusion locally recently around and some challenge around the street food corner in Bournemouth, Lower Gardens and Whitecliff, and how that operates. That isn't procurement at all. It's not in scope of procurement, and all that's happening there is that the traders are paying for a license for a pitch to trade, and so they're buying that trading pitch the same as a market stand would. So that's out of scope of procurement. But to clarify that, because of the recent questions, to clarify that, I have put a link now on the procurement webpage to so that there's better transparency about how that street food corner piece ties in.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the first recommendation is to note progress to date. Could you talk us through the second recommendation? So considers an approval mechanism to refine the 9 measures set out in the strategy. So what is it that we're doing as a committee there?
So the wording of those 9 measures that are in the strategy don't necessarily lend themselves directly to wording a KPI, and I've tried to tailor KPIs so that it's easier to more meaningful to look at the trajectory. Are we going in the right direction? And understanding our position now in terms of percentages, understanding a target of where we want to get to. So I'm trying to rerun those 9 measures as KPIs that help us understand performance. So part of it is around just allowing procurement board to think about how those measures are phrased, not moving away from what they mean, but how they're phrased, so that we're thinking about how we measure them and how we report them. And then the second piece, I guess, that comes with that is because what I've brought to you this evening has actually got targets in there, is if we move those targets, then who's got the authority to move those targets? Do they need to come back to this committee, or can that also be delegated to the procurement board?
Thank you, that's helpful. So where, for example, SME contracts, the measure required by Audit and Governance Committee is increasing the number of contracts awarded to SMEs. So you have proposed that the metric is the percentage of BCP contracts awarded to SMEs. So you're proposing that as a proxy for what the strategy. Yeah. Okay. So I am happy to consider the KPIs as set out this way. But I think we probably then need, and I assume others are likely supportive of this as well. But I suppose the question about the targets and whether they should be set by us or delegated, I think that's probably something we need to discuss a bit more between us. Sorry. We're both indicating the other wants to talk. Who's going to go for it?
Chair, I think we need to clarify the wording of the recommendation at 2, because obviously I think Stuart is suggesting that is changed. So I have some suggested wording which I could read out, and if that fits what Stuart wants to achieve and you're happy with. Otherwise, I don't know whether we just need a quick, really brief adjournment just for Stuart to sort of perhaps put in writing what he wants that second recommendation to be. But if I read out the suggestion,
well, wouldn't it be a third recommendation? Because we're happy to approve these KPIs as you've set out and agree that those are proxies. I think we're happy to agree that, despite whatever we decide about who should have
So Chair, so the second recommendation would be that you have considered the approval mechanisms and you're happy with.
Yeah, I suppose we agree the approval mechanism, and then a third recommendation is that the Audit and Governance Committee delegates the targets, for KPI targets, to the procurement board. But yeah.
Are you making a proposal for that, Chair?
Well, I suppose somebody should, if it's up for discussion. I mean, I'm not sure that I am comfortable with supporting that, so I don't really want to propose it if I'm not sure I'm going to support it.
Chair,
but I'm open to discussion on that point.
Chair, obviously your decision. It may just be worth Mr. Bickle receiving some words for the Democratic Service Officer just to review. I think it could potentially be ambiguous, or it would be alleged to be ambiguous of what you're actually agreeing as a committee first of all, then we were delegating. So my suggestion would be if Mr. Bickle just sort of shares his thoughts once again, so we can capture exactly what it is committee is being asked to do. Committee then agrees to that, what is an amendment effectively, and then we can make sure whatever delegation is required for the board can be given, because the decision-making ability of the board is uncertain, so I couldn't confirm to you that it's definitely not required. So,
I mean, the more I think about it, the more I think we should retain control over the targets, at least for a little bit further into the strategy. So, Adams.
Chair, just to give you some reassurance with regards to, because I think the proposal was to delegate those targets to the Procurement and Contract Management Board. I am the chair of that Procurement and Contract Management Board. The other officers that sit on that is the monitoring officer, the head of internal audit, but also we have representatives from the Children's Commissioning Team, the Adults Commissioning Team, and from the Operations Services. Previously, it was the corporate director, has been delegated to one of the service directors. So it's quite a significantly senior team, if you like, within the authority that is looking at that. And I think, as perhaps suggested, is that if we look at those targets, clearly we're going to take on board the feedback from this committee. And again, the feedback is that you want us to keep stretching them, but as Stuart said, to keep them realistic. But the point of all of this is that now, hopefully from tonight, we've got into that rhythm of reporting back on a 6-monthly basis so that you can see how we're doing, and clearly we can reflect back the targets we set. And if that's not been sufficient, then actually you think we should be pushing ourselves more, then clearly you can then give us that direction.
Councillor Tarling, then Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, just what's the purpose of the KPIs? It's just a metric for us and for the cabinet to monitor performance, and we still have the ability to interrogate a KPI in greater detail. So for me, it's rather semantics. I mean, I'm happy that it's delegated to the board to refine the wording, because if it comes back at the next 6 month and it's not right, or we think there's something that it's not quite hitting the spot on, that's when we drill down and ask further questions on it. So I have no reservations about that.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. I think, to actually set targets from the board, you need a level of expertise in the area that you're dealing with, and I wouldn't certainly pretend to have that level of expertise. So I'm very happy for the targets to be set, and as you say, we can question them whenever we want to.
We one of those incompetent councillors.
Yeah.
No, I think that's helpful. I very much agree that the procurement board is the right place to be proposing the targets. My only reservation is that I know that the intention behind this is for A&G to be very close to and monitoring these measures, and I would have thought that part of that would be quite tight ownership of the appropriate targets. But I am persuaded that maybe setting the targets at that kind of level is getting a little bit operational. And I would be happy if the procurement board sets out quite clearly to us 6 monthly why that target, what the KPI is, and how that target has been reached. And we have the ability to challenge that and change that as needed. And the procurement board would take our direction if we thought that was not correct, wouldn't it? Thank you. Mr. Stannard.
I think you've got to the right answer, but I was just going to refer back to Barry Morris. I think your role is to, a bit like Councillor Vicky Slade did earlier, is to challenge the methodology of coming up with a target, because that's the governance and how, not the target per se. So I think that's what you as a committee are here to do in this specific context.
Can I request that when we get this in 6 months, we have a little bit of a backstory of the target with it, so we can see how you've adjusted that since our last meeting, and we can make sure we're following the target as well as the KPI.
Yeah, sure.
To Jill.
So can I just clarify what I understand the amended recommendation is, which would be one, that the Audit and Governance Committee notes progress to date in delivering BCP's procurement and contract management strategy 2024-28 and the update provided. The Audit and Governance, second one, the Audit and Governance Committee agrees the approval mechanism to refine the 9 measures described in section 5.5, etc. And then a third one, that the Audit and Governance Committee delegates authority to the Procurement and Contract Management Board to consider the targets and report back to the committee in 6 months' time.
Is it to consider the targets or set the targets?
Set the targets.
Yeah, maybe it's set and then we can consider.
Set.
They can set, we can consider. Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine.
you
So
very
if
much.
somebody could then move
I'll,
that
I'll
chair
move.
when you're ready.
The first one first. We note the progress to date in delivering the strategy. Is it all agreed? The second one, we agree the approval mechanism set out in this pack.
And Chair, because it's a change, could we get a seconder and just take a formal?
Did we have a second?
Thank you. And
Thank
just
you.
Everyone's agreed.
And are we agreed on that? That we agree these KPIs, and that third, we've just read it out. So it's that we.
The Audit and Governance
Delegate.
Committee delegates authority to the Procurement and Contract Management Board to set the targets and report back to the committee in 6 months.
I'm happy to propose that in just a second. All agreed? Thank you very much.
Thank
That's
you.
very, very helpful. Thank you for your patience going through this and look forward to seeing it in 6 months. Right. Would anybody like a short comfort break? Can we take a 10-minute break? You think that'll be all right? Welcome everybody online and thank you for bearing with us. So moving on to item 9, risk management, corporate risk register update. I'm handing over now to Fiona Manton online. Thank you for waiting patiently for so long.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. This is the quarterly update to the Committee of the Council's Corporate Risk Register. As part of the continuing development of risk management and the reporting of risks, to assist members this quarter, I've again included a summarised version of the risk management process we follow. This is included as Appendix 1 on page 93 of your report pack. To further support members in the approach of the Council, at Appendix 2 on page 95, I've included the Council's risk matrix and the definitions relating to the quantification of risk. The matrix included is a 4x4 matrix where risks are mapped by assessing both the likelihood and the impact. The basis of the assessment in terms of impact is provided by the definitions on page 96, with the likelihood being outlined on page 97. The assessment, you'll note, is based on 7 possible impacts of the risk and encourages multiple risk factors to be considered to ensure the full implications of the risk are understood and evaluated. This supports an accurate scoring. The risk register you see here today is the corporate risk register. This represents the top level of risk for the organisation and sits at the top of the risk pyramid. By this I mean that sat below this are registers such as the Key Assurance Directorate project and in some instances team risk registers. To assist in this respect and understanding the risk pyramid, at Appendix 5 on page 167, I've included a graphic of the risk levels in place in the organisation. In relation to this quarter's update, to assist the committee at paragraph 11 of the report on page 89, the material updates to the risks are outlined. And in summary, there are changes to risk CRO2. We may fail to achieve appropriate outcomes and quality of service for children and young people, including potential inadequate safeguarding. To risk CRO9, we may fail to maintain a safe and balanced budget for the delivery of services and managing the MTFP. And risk CR24, we may fail to adequately address concerns around community safety. And CR28, finally, we may fail to adopt the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole local plan. The corporate risk register is shown at Appendix 4, starting at page 101. This is a snapshot in time, as the risk register is constantly subject to change, with new risks being added and considered and allocated across the various levels of the organisation continually. In terms of the development of risk management, the process for developing a new risk management policy has been delayed, but this will now be progressed and an update policy being presented to CMB by the end of the calendar year. The risk management team continues to review risk constantly and report and monitor and circulate risk information. And we set out a little bit more information on this at paragraph 28. In addition, we continue to develop the risk app, with the first dashboards being available, and we're now in phase 2 of the app development, which will see further reporting abilities. Thank you for the opportunity to present my report, and I'd be happy to assist where I can with any questions.
Thank you very much. And as always, thank you for the way the report is presented. We have the Lindy online, the independent member Lindy.
Thank you. So my question is quite a mouthful. It's not a question, it's an observation, but it is a mouthful, so just bear with me. And it is around your target risk scores. So if you have a look on page 101, where there's a summary of all your risks, 7 of the 14 risks have a target risk score that is currently, as per your policy, your risk policy, in the red area. So the target is red. So according to your policy, that was the latest updated risk policy, it says that if your risk scores are in green, it's considered comfortable, amber, it's considered manageable, and red is outside tolerance. So what I'm getting at is you can't have a target risk score that's red. So you are then targeting out of tolerance risk levels. There are instances in terms of the Orange Book and the other risk standards where you can have temporarily a target risk score that's in red. So that is that I mentioned two instances. It's where you're in time busy with implementing additional controls, awaiting the risk to be reduced, or if it's out of your cost benefit analysis, and it's just something that you cannot do anything about and you have to accept it. But in those instances, you have to clearly document the reasons why you are accepting the risk at an intolerable level. And that's my comment, is that that's not coming through in the report clearly. Why are you accepting? You should document in your report, why are you accepting risk that is in red? And being 50% of the corporate risks, it just feels a bit too much, that maybe one or two of the risks can be a red target score, but not half of it. But it's something management should look at and assess. And then lastly, I just wanted to make a comment. For instance, if you look at CR 27, I'm just taking the first one of the 7, where the target risk is above or in red. This is on page 105. So you say the gross risk score is a 16. If you go to 106, the net score is 16, and 107, the target score is 16. On page 106, you have a risk response strategy. So on the top of the page, there's mitigations in place and then the risk response strategies. So you've ticked there, you treat it, which doesn't speak to the fact that it's a super high risk in red. So I would say you can treat it and try and treat it, but you should definitely also tick then tolerate and accept if it's out of your control, and then include there a proper paragraph explaining why you are tolerating or accepting it. I'm just using this one. I've gone through all of them. I can maybe put it in the email, because most of these risks, the 7, do indicate you are treating it and you should be actually tolerate or accepting it. So I hope that made sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a really good question, good to point out. I mean, I think probably the answer is that we should be ticking treat and tolerate or accept for a number of them, but I very much agree that that should be spelt out more clearly, if that is the, to what extent it can be treated versus to what extent we have to tolerate it. Perhaps that might help. Did you want to add anything on that point, or is that one to take away?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take that one away. I'm also happy to look at the earlier point around explaining the position in terms of those where the target risk score is in the red zone. So we provide an explanation there as to why that's arising.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Lindy's made, and it's a point actually I regularly make when I have my meetings with Fiona, so she'll be used to it. So thank you for that.
I had a question for the Chief Executive, not to spring it on you, but I think it would be helpful to know how you have perceived the risk register, coming at it with fresh eyes. Do you think that the way that the risks are being calibrated and grouped and set out feels like a natural way to think about them and address them?
Thank you. So yeah, really good question. Sort of coming in as a chief exec, one of the many things I've been trying to do is get a sense of the risk of the organisation. And in a really helpful way, from my sort of 6 weeks here, what am I hearing on the ground from colleagues, talking to the management board, talking to cabinet, talking to colleagues here, and then how does that relate to the document? So to relate to the risk register. So are the things that are keeping me awake at night based on conversations, is it the same list as on the table? And that's sort of in a very simplistic way, the test I've had. And in fact, this morning I had that very conversation with Nigel and Fiona about, does this risk register feel right? And indeed, we've had the same conversation with the corporate management board. I think a couple of observations. I think it's a helpful risk register. I think the style and approach seems fairly typical for local government. I really recognise the point that's just been made about there are some really significant risks that we have to accept. We're doing everything we can to mitigate them. We have to accept them, but we need to evidence that we are. I think there's a really important cultural trap that I don't want us to fall into, and I don't think we have, but that sense of there's a big risk, so we'll put it on the risk register and that means it's all right. I'm really determined that the risk register drives our thinking and action as an organisation, and is one of the factors that determines where we put our time and effort and money as well. So that's really, really important. I think the other conversation that I've had with Nigel and Fiona is just that sense that of making sure that we've got risks that are sort of owned by, well, each risk needs to be owned, but owned within the kind of the individual directorates, those operational risks, and then making sure that they aggregate up into the council-wide corporate risks. So that feels reassuring. Then there's one or two areas where it feels like there's a further risk register over here. So I'm sort of probing that. But generally, the things that are keeping me awake at night are on this list here. So I do find that strangely reassuring. So thank you.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. DSG, I'm afraid, Mr. Richards, just to put some points of clarification on it. In the risks, it says that the deficit for 25-26 is now 67 million. So is the difference between 55 and 67 generated more borrowing? The other aspect to that is, I understand that we cannot charge interest to the DSG deficit. It has to be paid from revenue. But I just wonder, do we also account for the loss of interest that we no longer get because we don't have 113 million pounds in the bank? It's like a double whammy there that I don't think we see the visibility of it, because it actually makes the situation a lot more worse if you look at it like that. But I'd just be interested to hear what you think about that.
So, if I may, Chair, for you, just to highlight that, yes, as a DSG deficit increases, everything else being equal, so does the borrowing. Therefore, consequently, so does the interest on that borrowing. Yep. What we've done recently in the MTFP is we've made it more explicit around what is the interest cost associated with that borrowing. And now it's a separate line on the summary that we put in those tables that we take to cabinet, so you can see that impact. Right. Now, ultimately, it is a bit whether that's interest that we paid on it or lost interest on the investment. Either way, it amounts to the same. It's a cost, of having that DSG deficit, which is absolutely astronomical.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I think we did already talk about this, and it comes up every time, and every single discussion it seems to be whatever we can do to support with your ongoing efforts with the government. It's hard to see how little we can do. I suppose the other side of it is bringing down costs. There was a 10-year plan for bringing down that budget. But I'm assuming that that's appropriately covered by children's committee or scrutiny committee, which kind of brings to another question I have, which is that what's the name of it before? The one on children's fail to achieve appropriate outcomes, CRO2. This is kind of, it's consistently on here, and I am anxious about the overlap between what we look at as a committee and the assurance we get as a committee with what children's overview and scrutiny committee look at separately. And I just want to make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks there in terms of the assurance we should be getting. So I think that applies for the high needs block strategy as more broadly around the risks. So I wonder if we need to do a special session on it, or maybe we should get a chair of the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee to come and get some of the officers and children, just to make sure that everything that is treating this risk is being looked at somewhere. But perhaps officers can talk a little bit about that and how you're comfortable that it's getting the oversight it needs from committees.
Chair, for you, I think that's a good suggestion, and it might be something that you want to talk to the chair of Children's Overview and Scrutiny offline about what arrangements can you put in place to ensure Audit and Governance Committee that committee is actually reviewing that expenditure and constantly seeking assurance that it is to a minimum, even if it is more than the grant that they make available, and what processes they've got in place, and are they efficient and effective, and all that sort of stuff for monitoring and evaluation. I think that's a conversation that's probably worth between you and the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny and Children having, and then considering how you then respond. I do know, however, that from my conversations with that chair, it is something that they are alive to. It is something that they are regularising on their agendas, i.e. it's coming up on regular occasions for them to continually seek that reassurance. But it might be a matter that's best taken offline and maybe reported back here.
Shall we put that on the action tracker for me to go away and talk to the chair of the Children's Committee and think about a way of doing an item where we have some of the officers from that area come and talk us through how various things are being tracked. I'm just very struck from the presentation from Grant Thornton earlier about how when the inquiry comes, we're responsible for governance, and how close do we feel to the governance around children's safeguarding. Yeah, okay, let's take that away as an action. Yes, please, Chief Executive.
If I may, just a quick comment. I think the high needs block is an issue for the whole council, and I think you're absolutely right that we have to make sure that it's not just that it doesn't fall through the cracks. But I think as much as a challenge that sort of children's are kind of hosting, because that's where the budget essentially sits. I think part of the approach that needs to be done, some of it is about constructing sort of additional capacity in schools and that sort of thing, and that's different parts of the council. So one of the things I'm trying to do is explore with the organisation is every aspect that is the whole council focused on this. It's one of the key risks. So I think it's absolutely right that you find the right home for it in terms of scrutiny and then audit. But I'm trying not to position this as just a children's problems because we're all part of the solution.
Thank you. Okay, let's aim to do something in the coming, well, in the forward plan as appropriate, and we'll look at CRO2, which is outcomes and appropriate outcomes and quality service for children and young people, including adequate safeguarding, because we've been seeing that high on the risk register for some time. So it's that one plus the DSG budget, because of the part that does play in trying to bring it down, even if at this stage the problem is wider than that. Okay, we'll take that away and try and work that into the forward plan somewhere. I had a question which is on, sorry, do not have it to hand. It's the one on cliff erosion. This is one that I've seen, environmental impact, CR27. I've seen this on the agenda for every single one, and we never talk about it. But the more you think about it, the more terrifying it is. And I think it's a good example of one where we do just sort of take it a little bit as having to tolerate it. I noticed in there that it said there is no budget intended for it, for enhancing or doing anything over and above maintenance. That's my understanding. So not for anyone here, but perhaps Fiona, if you could take that away, I'd be keen to understand if there are inquiries made into possible sources of funding, if there might be a particular plea for grant funding or something for specific to updating the infrastructure around that. I'm sure the team does everything to try and get any cash it can to help with that, but I'm just very conscious it's just sitting there. The direction of travel is consistent, and it's quite sort of existentially important for us as a town. So, is that something that you could take away and ask the team to give us a bit of an update on what they're doing to try to secure funding specific to that?
Yes, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'll take that away and respond to the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. The new risk that you've added, CR28, about the adoption of the BCP local plan. Yeah, obviously we've had the kickback from, well, government basically, that, or the inspector, that what we were proposing wasn't good enough. But I'm conscious that we are one local authority, but planners and developers or whatever are still using 3 local plans. Bournemouth 2012, Christchurch 2014, Poole 2018, and they were all created by separate planning authorities looking inward to some extent and not corporately for the whole area. It is something that we need to really, and I know we don't have spare resources financially, but effort to at least try and keep to that deadline of 2028. And it would be fantastic if we could do it before the deadline. Obviously, we've got the complication of very high housing targets, and there's limits to how high you can go up, though not to some extent. There was an application near Bournemouth Central Station for a 39-storey block of flats. That got refused. But it's clearly something that, if it was brought forward at least half a year earlier than intended, it would actually be very good. I know, looking at historic local plans or local plans of other areas, it's very good to see where a local authority is wanting a commercial development or residential development to take place. It actually drives investment and initiatives forward. So I think it's something that the local plan section of the council needs to prioritise more than saying that we're probably going to slip beyond 2028. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on that or want to take away?
I'm happy again to take that one and have a conversation with the Director of Planning around the timeframes for the local plan, as mentioned in the risk update. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight a few issues with regards to risk. CR16 on page 158 of the report, that we may fail to secure or manage partnerships and miss out on associated funding, be unable to deliver services for communities. And what I'm really getting from reading the document is issues about the resources to be able to manage those partnerships, but also from personal experience of both working within the council and as a councillor, the fact that departments still work in silos and there isn't that joined up sharing of information about grants perhaps that are available, or opportunities for cross-team, across department to come together and work on an application. So it was a concern about that, especially given that we're acknowledging as a council that this is a really important model of delivery, like working together and getting external funding through that partnership work. But I also wanted to highlight that if the community doesn't come along on that journey, there could be a risk that partnerships that have already been exist within the communities could be overlooked or damaged. So my plea would be to identify some kind of way of resourcing that important work but I also appreciate that's a real challenge for us. But I just wanted to highlight it. And I would like to see more information in that section, risk response strategies, about how that risk is being treated. And I agree with what Lindy was saying, there needs to be more information in there. So thanks.
One more question from me. This is recent protests outside asylum hotels, and whether they sit in CR21, the impact of global events and causing pressure, and because there's some in there which sort of suggests that there might be an overlap, or is it in CR24, community safety? It's just, again, want to take away, you know, the tension is increasing, and you hear elsewhere in the country of it becoming more violent and arson and unit. So it would just want to be clear on where that would be captured, and how that's being monitored. But again, happy to take that away. Are these okay to be included on the action tracker?
Yes, Chair, I've made a note of all the actions that have come out of this discussion.
Brilliant. I would be happy if they were sent to committee members in an email, or
Chair, we now have the tracker on the Teams channel, which you all have access to, and it's a live document. So as soon as something's
Fiona can put the answers to those questions on the action, or is the action that she will send an email?
Yeah, I can send an email. That's fine.
Perfect. Did we have any more questions on this item? Oh, Chief Executive.
Thank you. If I could quickly respond to Councillor Armstrong's observation around partnerships. Just looking through the template, I think the as it goes through, it does one of the actions by December 2025 to have done a sort of a capacity assessment. What skills have we got? You know, is that assessment? So I think we'll be able to, if we kind of stick with that timeline, be able to come back. I absolutely recognise that we don't want to miss opportunities slipping through our fingers. And I recognise the point about sort of silos. I think it's we need to do what we can to mitigate that. So it looks like there is some action in hand. I'll follow this up with my colleague Isla, but we'll be able to come back and update you later. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Fiona, in future, I personally would not be unhappy if you joined at the item before this one, if that made things easier for you. But again, happy to take that away. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you.
Okay, so that the recommendation is members of Audit and Governance Committee note the update provided in this report relating to corporate risks. Consensus to note? Great. Health and safety update. Rebecca Laurie. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Again, thank you for waiting.
No problem. Good evening, everyone. I'll be providing the annual health and safety update to the Audit and Governance Committee. I'll start with the ongoing governance arrangements assurance. The governance arrangements, please excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat, so I may go quiet if I need to cough. The governance arrangements include the Health and Safety and Fire Safety Board, Directorate meetings and the Safety Supporters Forum, all of which meet quarterly. In lower risk directorates, usually the support directorates such as Finance, Estates and Benefits, excuse me, and People and Culture, where quarterly meetings are not held, health and safety is always a standing agenda item in the senior leadership meetings. Contributing to these governance arrangements, all directors are sent information regarding reported incidents, such as accidents and near misses, which involve colleagues in their area. This enables us to demonstrably show that there is senior leadership oversight, accountability, and commitment to health and safety, all of which assist in strengthening our health and safety culture. In terms of corporate work, we continue to offer a service level agreement to our maintained schools. Since the last Audit and Governance Committee, we've visited a further 2 maintained schools to carry out a safer school inspection, which is essentially a health and safety audit. This means that 5 of our 7 schools where BCP Council is the employer have been inspected now. The health and safety management processes within the schools are to a very high standard, we found. but the team continue to work with the schools to improve aspects of their site management. We're also in the process of producing inspection templates for our depots, which are obviously higher risk, and our lower risk office accommodation assets. The proactive nature of this work will assure us of our compliance with regulations and our safety, our internal safety procedures and policies. In terms of corporate systems, at the last Audit and Governance Committee, I mentioned that the design of the health surveillance database was being developed. I'm pleased now to report that this has now been completed and is now in use, with minor tweaks being made along the way. The database will ensure that all health surveillance information can be retained in a central location so we can meet our legal obligations in terms of record retention, which is for 40 years since the last exposure to a hazard, or until the colleague reaches age 100 years. Our in-house IT are also developing a display screen equipment database. This will streamline the completion of the DSE self-assessment by users, so it can be completed online and will automatically populate the database, allowing the users themselves, their managers and corporate health and safety access to the reports from a central storage location. I've listed a few of the policies and procedures that we've updated since the last Audit and Governance Committee. I won't go through them one by one. In terms of Health and Safety Executive or HSE interventions, we've had no planned or unannounced visits from the HSE. At the time of submitting the report, the team have submitted 28 RIDDOR notifications. 3 of these were on behalf of the maintained schools. We've had 2 dangerous occurrences, one of which was the fire at Herne Household Waste Recycling Centre, and 28 injury-related reports. These were a mixture of injuries to members of the public, which meant that they unfortunately went directly to hospital from the scene, a colleague having a specified injury, or due to having over 7 days off. The corporate health and safety training budget has enabled the team to facilitate 68 health and safety training courses, which has supported 657 colleagues to attend training. These include training sessions such as first aid, de-escalation and personal safety training, conflict resolution and training on the telephone, and asbestos awareness. That concludes my health and safety update. Thank you for the opportunity to present my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, a good report. Thank you. One thing I've got here is that you've reported here on the RIDDORs, and I didn't see anywhere here about AFR report here. Is that part of the sort of accident frequency rate for numbers of FTEs and stuff like that? And in the pyramid of obviously fatalities at the top, and then RIDDORs, and then all the way down to sort of near misses. Do you collate that data? Is that possible to produce that into a report for us?
Yeah, by all means.
Could I make a recommendation then that we get this? So is those that where the health and safety, the triangle, the bottom being near misses, and I'm probably more interested in the near miss reporting, or the health and safety reporting thing, where I actually don't know how it works in the council, where we've got employees have an opportunity to report. I see on the website. Apologies, I've not been on the health and safety part of the website yet. I'm going to have a look at it, or intranet. But how if I've got a let's say a loose light switch or stuff like that, or a bit of carpet that's peeling up in a in a school, how I report that as a potential near miss, and it's focusing on that bottom end where we only have a few RIDDORs, which is nice to see, but it's that bottom end that I think is more interesting, and then the AFR rate as well. And the other thing we've mentioned about benchmarking and KPIs, how those AFRs work with other local authorities. Now, I've recently done one for my industry and on deaths in construction, and the HSE produced a spreadsheet which you have to spend ages going through to work out. So I try and find out the average age of deaths in the construction industry, because most people get it wrong. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if you can extrapolate that from the HSE website data as well. If there is one for local authorities and schools, it's possibly one for education thing, but especially the AFRs. Thank you.
Two quick questions from me, or comments. One, how would all of these injuries, these going to hospital, what sort of site would that be happening on? You mentioned number of injuries that result in going to hospital straight from the scene. I'm just trying to get a picture in my mind of what sort of BCP premises we're talking about there, but I don't want to get into any specifics if that's difficult. And then the second comment is just, is there any way of escalating the pace of doing the schools inspections, because they seem to be quite valuable?
In terms of your first question, it could be any area of council land. So it could be Heathland, it could be Upton Country Park, it could be Pier Approach or the Lower Gardens. It would be any council land where a member of the public seeks first aid from us or subsequently reports that they've gone directly to hospital. And sorry, can you remind me of the second question again?
The second one was just to comment on how valuable the Safer Schools inspections seem to be, and how I would certainly be keen on ensuring that those were rolled out quickly. 5 out of 14, it seems as though that would be a good thing to prioritise, but of course you're under other pressures, I'm sure. I think Mr. Sannard wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks. I just check with Bex virtually through the screen. In terms of the generalistic, view of what the trips and slips is the main, where people might break an ankle or do some other, break something that requires hospital treatment. So that's the vast majority is trips and slips. That's fair, Bex? Yep.
All right, do we have any more questions? And just to check, are you going to take away Councillor Tarling's request about providing the pyramid? Yeah.
Yes, happy to take that away. I would like some direction as to how you'd like that reported in the next health and safety update.
Are you happy to email directly with what you have in mind there? Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Right, so for this we need to Audit and Governance Committee notes the continued progress in implementing the health and safety governance arrangements and operational updates, and that the health and safety ongoing governance arrangement updates continue to be reported annually to the Audit and Governance Committee. Do we have consensus to note that? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Right, item 11, Emergency Planning and Business Continuity Annual Report. I have Alison Whitley. Welcome, and again, thank you for waiting to join.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee and everybody. So this is the annual monitoring report for emergency planning and business continuity, which are statutory duties under the Civil Contingencies Act for the Council. And so the report is aiming to provide an overview of activity that's taken place in those areas, and therefore to provide assurance in terms of in relation to those duties. So I will take it that the report is read, so just wanted to draw a couple of particular key points out of the report. A really significant development is that, in line with recommendations from the Grenfell Public Inquiry for local authorities, the public inquiry found that local authorities' resilience perhaps wasn't really embedded across the organisation and seen as everyone's responsibility. And a recommendation was made that that needed to be addressed by local authorities, and that all staff were aware of their duties in relation to preparedness and in response. And as a result of that, a new standard clause is being put into staff contracts as part of pay and rewards, so that we are able to recognise that we may need to mobilise staff to other duties as part of that corporate-wide response in emergency, and obviously the activity in relation to planning as well. So that's really quite a significant development for us, and an ability to redeploy staff and to focus on areas that where we really need staff to do different activities in an incident. COVID was a really good example of that. We might have more acute incidents when we just simply need to get staff out to do door knocking, where we need people on the ground to support our communities. So that's a really positive step forward. And that's come about fairly recently, and obviously we've got pay and reward being introduced later this year. The other thing I was just going to draw committee's attention to, obviously it's very timely this week, the BBC and other media ran reports about National Cybersecurity Centre issuing guidance to businesses that they need to be prepared for cyber attacks, and the need to look at not being able to exist without IT, and being able to continue in a slightly more analog fashion, and the need to actually prepare for that. That is obviously a duty that we have, a statutory duty as an organisation, to be able to deliver our critical functions as part of our business continuity planning. So we're very fortunate that we have actually got the South West Regional Cybercrime Units attending to deliver a tabletop exercise for the council in December, and we'll have the opportunity to rehearse our response to that. We have a cyber response plan, but we'll give the opportunity for services to look at their planning, to rehearse those, and actually see if we do have any gaps and where we can develop our response further. And it's very much felt that it's obviously something that is not an if nowadays, it's a when, and actually how well we can recover from that. So we need to be as prepared as possible. So that's a really positive step, and we're looking forward to actually conducting that exercise later this year. So that they were the key things I wanted to bring out from the report to committee's attention, and obviously I'll be happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. My question was on cybersecurity, and yeah, exactly to your point about it's in the national guidance now more prominently about organisations having physical backups and literally paper or offline systems in place. So I'm keen to know where the overlap is, where the interaction is between the cyber strategy and your work, and what is in place there. And then the second part of it is, could we have an update on that tabletop session, which I presume is sort of a test of your resilience? And is that something the committee members would be interested in hearing the findings from? Just me? Looks like it's just me. Could I see the response? No, I'd just be really interested to see kind of what that tells about the level of readiness for that sort of attack. Thank you.
Definitely, we'll be seeing some debriefing and putting together a report with the key findings, so we can bring that back to committee. Obviously need to do that sooner than I tend to report on an annual basis, so obviously need to see that before next December.
It sounds like it might not need to come back to committee, but I'd be interested to know. Chief Executive.
So back to you then.
Sorry, I just said Chief Executive wants to come in.
Thank you. And just a quick one, if it does come back to the committee, can we be a careful judgment that we don't talk inappropriately in public and expose any vulnerabilities we might have? If were we to have any.
No, exactly. So no, I'd be interested for that to be shared with any councillors who are interested. But I agree, it wouldn't be for open discussion. So Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that really informative report, Alison. My question is about how do councillors engage with this? I apologise if you've already talked about this, but I just couldn't see it in the report. But I'm thinking where there is a particular emergency or vulnerability or crisis, being able to engage with those ward councillors and perhaps use them to get out there and support members of the community, that would certainly be something that I'd like to be included in. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of councillor engagement in emergency planning, we have that sort of very clear plan that we follow in terms of delivery. Obviously, councillors have a really key community role in that, but we are doing some work to develop a sort of councillor charter or protocol in terms of engagement, both with engagement with the media, but also in terms of that response on the ground. So that's one aspect of it. There's also the other element of actually community resilience and actually how councillors can work to help our sort of communities, individuals, families become more resilient. We've actually got 2 training sessions coming up, one next week and one on the 4th of November, where myself and our community liaison officer will be doing sort of a presentation and looking at areas that councillors can get involved. So we've got 2 aspects, the response side of it and doing ongoing work and developing a protocol, and then looking at councillors' role, that sort of pre-emergency and also post-emergency, about helping our communities to themselves become more resilient, so that hopefully the more resilient our communities can be, the more we can then focus our resources where they're most needed, on those that need most help as well. So we're trying to help our communities by helping them as well. So that they're 2 key bits of work. And that's been recognised on the board risk register as well recently, a new risk when we felt that we need to make sure we've got more documentation, protocols, and actually working more closely with councillors in terms of that role in response.
Councillor Waite.
Hey, I don't know if this is relevant, but if it's not, then there's no need for me to be sort of pernickety. But paragraph 32, where you've mentioned BCP Council responded to the significant fire and evacuation at the Gainsborough Care Home. I don't think there was a fire. I think that a fire appliance attended because they weren't because of need of like breathing apparatus potentially, because they weren't quite sure what was going on. But I don't think there was an actual fire. And the only reason to bring it up now, not email you, is that I've been told before that you have to say it publicly once the report has been published in order for it to be changed. So I'll leave that with you to think about, and if it does need to be changed, then yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bartlett, I'm sorry, I was going
That's
to go
okay,
to you
that's
next.
fine.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I welcome the clarification of the councillor's role in emergency situations. I do recall being involved in a bomb threat issue where residents were evacuated from their 2 blocks of flats. And I was involved in that. I remember thinking, what do I do? Don't panic, Mr. Mannering. But it was very well handled, I have to say, by the council team. We did get involved, but it would be great to see some more clarity on that. So I saw that in the report, so thanks for that. The other thing I would just mention is about the cybersecurity issue that you mentioned just now. There is, of course, a digital working group, and I'm sure that plays a part in the programme of the digital working group, just to look at those issues. Just mention it, that it is on the radar, so to speak.
If that is all on that item, thank you very much. Appreciate you staying. That was very, very informative. And we'll move on. Oh no, this one actually has 2 recommendations. Right, the A&G committee notes the emergency planning and business continuity activity that has taken place during the monitoring period, the improved resourcing position within the emergency planning team, which has enabled the team to refocus on the work programme in support of the organisation, and the background information on the national context for resilience and how this is likely to direct local level activity. Do we have consensus to note the report? Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on. Item 12, internal audit, quarterly audit plan update. I believe it's Ruth which is going to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So I'm taking you through our quarterly update report for internal audit. I'll also take this as read, so I won't take you through the details of the report, but I will draw your attention to several items as I go through. The first one is of the 18 reports we finalised during the quarter. I'd just like to draw your attention to the 2 partial audit reports that we have, which are on page 200 of your pack. The first one was in relation to a partial sorry, I've just lost my page. In relation to the Investment and Development Housing Acquisitions Programme review. So 3 high priority recommendations were made, all in relation to governance of that programme and project. These are all due to be implemented by November, and we'll follow those up in November. And so the next quarterly report will identify whether those are still outstanding or whether they've been implemented. The next one is in relation to deficit management in schools. Just a bit of context around that. At the time of the audit, 13 out of 14 of our maintained schools were projected to have an in-year deficit in 25-26, and 9 out of 14 of those schools were projected to have an overall deficit by the end of 26-27. So it's an increasing problem in the schools. Again, 3 high recommendations were made, and these are due to be implemented this quarter and next quarter. Those recommendations were both in relation to managing the deficits in individual schools, but also a kind of strategic overview of those issues as well. So again, we'll follow those up, and then we'll report any issues that haven't been addressed in the next report. I'd also just draw your attention to the adjustments to the audit plan this quarter. There are more than we would normally have. This is in relation to both accommodating requests from services in terms of timing and other priorities that they have, and also due to a change in resource in the internal audit team for the quarter. The detail is included on page 203, but I would just like to assure you that for those high priority audits that we've taken off the plan, high risk audits we've taken off the plan, we have identified other sources of assurance that will give that there are for those areas this year. So for example, that could be from an alternative provider such as the Care Quality Commission, who are doing reviews, or other providers, or it could be through follow-up of recommendations that we're doing ourselves. So they don't just get part, there is some process for doing that, and they will of course be considered for next year's audit plan, again if they're high risk. In terms of monitoring of the implementation of audit recommendations, the external auditor noted earlier in their presentation that was the effectiveness of implementation of recommendations was something for Audit and Governance Committee to follow, and also to call in, as per the recommendation, appropriate officers to account for those if that's necessary. So the table on page 211 has been enhanced slightly this quarter. So we've also included on there information as to whether the audit report initially was a partial assurance report, and also we've noted the context of how many recommendations are still outstanding and implemented for each of those. So hopefully that will help the committee to perhaps identify audits and recommendations where they may want to call in the appropriate manager to give more information on those. Okay. Just also turning now to internal audit resource. In the external audit report earlier, the chair asked a question in terms of were there any particular issues that flagged up in the lessons from 23-24 in terms of BCP. One of the issues that was on there was in terms of vacancy rates in internal audit. So I'm pleased to say at the moment we are fully resourced at the moment. We have had an overall reduction in our resource during this year, so of 1.35 full-time equivalents. One of those was part of our, you'll remember we've reported to you previously that we had 3 audit apprentices for a 2-year period to address the difficulty in the recruitment in internal auditors. And it was always the plan that of those 3, we would take on 2 out on a permanent basis, and we have now done that. So the losing the 1 was always part of a longer term processes that we had for a temporary position. The apprentices who are obviously working 80% of the time at a lower level, and now we've recruited 2 of those in at a higher level on 100% of the time. The remaining reduction of 0.35 is to reflect the fact that we have replaced our previous audit manager with someone who is now working part-time. So we've now got that vacancy in place. Okay, so those are the issues I wish to draw your attention. So I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. That was really clear. And can I just say, I'm really impressed at the replacement of the 2 apprentices, because when I joined the committee, we were discussing about the problem recruiting, and it just seems like you did a very sensible, you took a very sensible approach, and it's worked, and I think that should be celebrated. Members with questions. Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry if this is not a very popular question. I'm just wanting to know what has been the impact of having Nigel leading the internal audit of Future Places in terms of resourcing and just within the department generally.
Lost a lot of hair.
It's been manageable because of in the grand scheme of things, a relatively short nature. You know, it's a 6-month period, and through the audit planning process, you know, we have contingencies within the plan in any case. We've got a budget for investigations in any case. So the issue would be if it was a long-term issue. You know, you can't tolerate me being away for years and months. But you know, we're right at the sort of threshold, I would say, where it's beginning to make an impact. And you'll notice the other colleagues, Rebecca Lowry and Alison Whitley, those colleagues have probably been more impacted than internal audit, because I've sort of said they know what they're doing. They need less, you know, of my input into managing the service. So it's probably the non-audit areas that have been impacted a little bit more. And I guess it's your judgment on whether you think those managers you heard from earlier were credible. And you know, I think you'll agree they know what they're doing. So yeah.
I would like to commend you for your work, actually. And thank you for everything that you and the team have been doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, just agree. Extend that support to everybody who's accommodated that, and I think that everyone tonight presented really well, spoke really well, answered questions. So please do feed that back. Adam Richards, I feel like I always refer to you as the CEO, and I should give you your title as well, but I just feel like Adam comes to mind first of all. So please don't read anything into that.
CFO, if you like. I was just going to pick up on the first point in the sense that, and almost echo what Nigel said, is clearly it's also been an opportunity for some staff to actually not have so much cover from Nigel, and to step into that space and expand their horizons, expand the opportunities, seize that, and hopefully prove extra value to members of the committee and the council.
But the point taken that we don't want to push it any further. Yeah. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. I have a question on the asset management priority 1 recommendation yet to be implemented. The implication of this is that we don't really know for sure what our assets are. But what's worrying me is that the forecast for completion of that particular high priority recommendation is completion in 2030. And I'm thinking, is it really going to take us that long to identify the assets of the organisation, given that, you know, we've already been at it for 6 years? So, you know, I hope I haven't sort of overstated this, but I mean, it just seems incredible that we've got a high priority recommendation that it's going to take till 2030 to implement. I don't understand what that's all about, really.
Well, I was. Would you like to come in on anything on that point, or if it's just an observation?
Yeah, I mean, my observation was if committee wanted more detail on that, then it would be appropriate probably to call in another officer, unless Adam is able to pick that up.
Chair, if I can come in on that one, I think what this is a reflection on is when we became BCP Council, there were a huge amount of records within the Christchurch area that were not electronic based, you know, and what we have to do is take them from whatever paper base that they were originally produced on and actually go through quite a difficult and consuming process to actually then transfer them into an electronic system. We have some resource devoted to that, and we are making good progress with that. However, you know, when it came to the prioritisation of resources to get it done quicker, you know, in the scheme of the budget pressures, particularly as we went through for 25, 26, it didn't, if you like, come out top of the list for that investment. So we almost accepted that it would take a longer time than we would ideally like, because it wasn't something that we wanted to invest in. We were happy as an organisation to accept that longer period of time to gradually transfer those records over to electronic source. Yeah.
Do you have a follow-up and then?
Thank you. Just to follow up on it, sorry, Leslie.
Yes, I'll have that there in a minute, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to whatever they call it. But I do recall this discussion at LGR, and in fact there was an issue about the value of the assets being transferred.
Yeah.
And some kind of mechanism was evolved to actually identify that, because clearly the asset values needed to be taken into account in the transfer. So that was an issue identified actually at the start of it. Sorry.
I think we're slightly confusing things in the sense that all the assets of Christchurch, lock, stock and barrel, were moved into BCP. All the assets of Poole were moved into BCP. All the assets of Bournemouth were moved into BCP. Full stop. The issue with regards to identification and whether they, were the issues that belong to Dorset County Council, and it was those assets as to, well, we're not talking about those assets here. We're talking about the Christchurch assets. We know what they are. It's just that they're not electronic, and it's just a process of getting them into an electronic database so that we can be more effective and efficient going forward. That the issue is being drawn out by that audit recommendation.
It's Councillor Tarling and then Councillor Dedman.
Can I just say? I was just going to say, can I call you Adam?
You may.
I was just going to say that we were complicated because a lot of our things were Dorset things. And as for it being written down in paper, yes, probably Christchurch had ledgers, I agree, but at least we knew what our assets were.
I'll say, look, it wasn't meant as a criticism. It was meant as a statement of fact.
Councillor Tarling, sorry.
Wow, I'm glad I let you go first, Councillor Dedman, because mine's going to seem very benign after this, but I have to also declare an interest. I'm a Christchurch Town Councillor, so hopefully it doesn't preclude me from commenting on this. But yeah, one of the things, an asset management survey is a very costly thing for a council to do, and be it laptops or civic centres, it's quite expensive thing to do. However, I am very concerned. There's a couple of assets that still haven't been transferred to Christchurch Town Council, and I think with this week we've now identified, or we're now going to be setting up new parish and town councils, and that is going to be magnified. Whether it's somebody mentioned mayoral trains in Poole, and I'm sure we can cut those into separate links and dish them round to whoever wants them. But there's going to be a really interesting discussion had there, and I think keeping track of that's going to be really challenging. So we're not there yet, and I'm sorry to speak as a town councillor with a BCP lanyard on, but it's not been brilliant.
Are they on parchment? Calligraphy? Yeah, that's what I have in the image in my head is
Again, what the councillors just referred to is not what's being discussed by that recommendation. That's a completely separate issue.
Did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I would, because I've just worked. I'll actually be 80 years old by the time it's finished. And I'm not sure I'll be here to see the results. So I hope they hurry up.
But Chair, if I may, it's one of those difficult choices we take on an annual basis as to how we allocate our limited resources and what we prioritise it. And clearly, the choice is, as an example, would you rather invest in Red Hill padding pool, or would you rather speed up this process? Discuss.
Well, I am reassured on your you're informing us that we know what the assets are. It's just about the system, and I will take that. I would like to ask about Appendix 1, high priority recommendations where the original target date was not met. We talked about this previously. I think we need to bring some people in to talk to them about some of these. I think that we haven't really to date sort of pushed on these because you've provided reassurance as to reasonable reasons for the revised target date. But I would like your advice as to whether or not you think it would be appropriate. I mean, I'm thinking of R1 on the management of spend. That is over a year. Some of the others have been this year, so I'd be willing to be tolerant of the ones where but although some of them are those dates under original revised target dates, are those now revised ones? So we can't really tell from this how long when the initial is that correct?
So the first column, original revised target date. So the original target date will be the first one in there. So taking, for example, the developer contributions, the original target date was December 24, and there's been 2 subsequent revised target dates, and a third one is in the second to end column there. So yeah, if you look in there, that gives you kind of a history of the number of times it's been revised, which again may point you to ones you may wish to get assurance on.
So I make it that there are 4 that were over that was the original date was last year. Knowing what you know about the reasons for the revisions, do you think it would be appropriate for us to ask them to come and the officers for those 4 to come and explain it to us? I don't want to be disproportionate if they have very good reasons, and but I think when it's that one's 31st of January 2024, this commercial operations one. So at some point we do need to think about following up on these. It's just a question of when.
This is quite a tricky question to answer, because what committee's got to decide, I think, is that is the explanation insufficient in the explanation from the director column? Is that insufficient or lacks detail or what? Because the committee has the explanation. There is an argument to say, what more can a director come and say to you? But if you think it lacks detail, we could add some detail, or we could ask for a written response. I suppose I'm just pushing back slightly on what is the benefit of a director coming to tell you that, other than you put a warning on their card to sort of say, don't mess with us.
Yeah, no, I don't want to take that approach. So just working from the bottom up, planning contributions. The service is attempting to recruit a planning contributions coordinator, and it's not been filled. Well, that's over a year and a half. Does that suggest maybe is it going to be filled? Is it particularly so perhaps can we take maybe as an action? Could we write to those and ask if there is anything extra they can provide by way of explanation why it's particularly difficult. I mean, the one above, appropriate action is underway, but I imagine that's about legacy bank accounts. I mean, perhaps if they could just give a little bit more colour on that, explain why it's a large task. Yeah, the ones with the original date is in 2024. Right, and then commercial major events governance. This action requires dedicated project support, so waiting on a new project management officer. I mean, I'm not dissatisfied with those explanations. It just feels like we should be engaging in understanding why it's challenging. And then there's for the top one, management of spend, partial assurance. The new there are still management capacity issues. So, what do committee members think? Do you think I'm being overly draconian about this? This is Appendix 1, 211. I think there are 4 of them, and I just noticed that the original date is in 2024. And at some point, we might want to ask, what is it about these positions that is very hard to fill? Is it just a resourcing? Is it is it a more senior decision, like to the point about the uploading the paperwork? Maybe it was a judgment call to deprioritize that. That would help. I don't want to drag anybody here unnecessarily. Sana.
Could I volunteer perhaps to take this one away and pose a couple of why type questions? Where the post can't be filled, why can't it be filled? What's the issue? And just come back with a slightly more detailed explanation, and then perhaps reserve the right next time to bring these people in if you don't like the answer. Excuse me.
No, that sounds good to me, because I have no doubt that there are perfectly good reasons, and I don't think it's appropriate for you to go into a huge amount of detail in filling this appendix in. It's not a criticism of the explanation that's in here. It's just a question at some point we might want to probe a bit more. I'm happy to if you could make some inquiries, and then we can discuss it next quarter. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, this is a sort of another property-related point to drag out from what we've got on children's services, health and safety, page 213. A list of buildings has been obtained, and now we're in the process of reconciling those buildings against things. And clearly, that, and in other spheres, if there are some buildings or plots of land or something or other within this inheritance from these 3 local authorities, which we don't need, are just lying idle, it's something that could, with due process of perhaps obtaining planning permission first, be disposed of. And yes, it's again a question of resources, but actually we may find these metaphorical assets down the back of the sofa, which will generate some capital receipts. It's just a question of, yes, converting some paper records into electronic records. And I do agree, Christchurch Borough Council, all compared with Bournemouth and Poole, had old systems. I occasionally used to do some work for them because they didn't have enough resources themselves. But yeah, I'm sure Councillor Cox would love to see some financial receipts from properties that we don't need anymore.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Oh, sorry, online, Lindy. Sorry if I've missed you.
I just want to wholeheartedly support Councillor Connolly with the suggestion of the long overdue recommendations that's not been implemented. I think it's something that I brought to the committee more than a year ago. It was something on training that just kept on being postponed, and not all the staff members didn't get the necessary training. It was something like that. It's a long time ago. But I never got sufficient responses to why it's not being implemented, and the target date keeps on being postponed and postponed. So I agree, maybe for a first step to get the relevant directors to give us more information on the ones that Nigel will say why. And then after that, I think then we need to bring them to the committee to give feedback verbally. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Right, so I've tweaked the wording for the recommendation. So shall I just read it out as amended? So unless anybody had any more questions on this item. Right, so that the Audit and Governance Committee, A, notes progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 2025-26 internal audit plan. B, notes the explanations provided for non-implemented recommendations, Appendix 1, and requests further explanation and assurance from the service/corporate director for recommendations with the original date in 2024. Yeah, happy to second that. Right, all in favour of that? Do we have consensus on that one? Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Right, item 13, annual report of internal audit, counter fraud work and whistleblowing referrals 2024-25. Now, if anyone wants to discuss the exact information in Appendix A, do let us know and we can make that a private session. But otherwise, let's carry on. Yeah. Okay, do we have any questions on, or did you want to speak to, sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
So my name's Simon Milne. I'm the other Deputy Chief Internal Auditor, so we're partners in crime, Ruth and I. But I oversee the corporate fraud resource, which consists mainly of one professional fraud investigator. We do pull other auditors in to help as we can. So it's quite a limited amount of resource, and just bear that in mind in terms of the activity that I'm going to explain. So I'm going to guide you through the annual report on all of activity carried out during the 24-25 financial year, and it also includes any formal whistleblowing referrals that were received in the same period. And our overall aim is to give this committee assurance that the governance arrangements around combating fraud and corruption are adequate. So just some key messages I want to pull out from the report. First one being policies. This committee has previously received an earlier committee report, all of the counter fraud policies. We're very good at reviewing them manually, improving them manually, and making sure they're fit for purpose. So that's a key task that was carried out. We check on how people are doing in terms of completion of mandatory fraud awareness training. I'm pleased to report that we're up to 87% of employees are actually undertaking that training. Considering there's quite a few staff that don't have access or easy access to computers, that's a pretty good level, but we're always looking to improve that. Wanted to mention the National Fraud Initiative data matching exercise. So this is an exercise that's been undertaken for several years now. And in the report, there's the usual, we've saved a bit of money identifying some duplicate credit payments, and we've able to tidy up the blue badge and travel passes records. But the significant issue in the report is from the results of the match of payroll between organisations, we're able to identify 3 employees who were found to have undeclared dual public employment, which was obviously a serious matter. None of these employees had declared their other employment, and as a result, 1 resigned straight away and 2 were dismissed. And further work is being carried out by us in conjunction with legal services and other professionals, HR, to look at ways to improve controls in this area, which will include making it clearer in our declarations of interest policy, improvements to an induction process, and we're also looking at detection measures as well. So we're looking at an internal audit. Is there some way of identifying other employees other than through this match? It's a national issue and it's an emerging issue, mainly through the sort of hybrid working that's appeared over the last few years since COVID. Wanted to mention the single person discount pilot. A lot of time was spent, particularly by the corporate fraud specialist on that in a year, and that was clear success. Nearly £700,000 worth of council tax yield was recovered during the period that we undertook the exercise. 556 discounts. So that was a success, and therefore that process is moved to the council tax department where it should sit. And I think, and Ruth's report did explain this continuing to yield some good results. We completed all of our targeted high-risk audit reviews during the year, and I can assure you that there was no partial assurance on those. So things like procurement cards, mandate fraud, home care payments, there were some improvements, but none of them significant. And we will be following those recommendations up as usual. Moving to investigations, so in terms of scaling it, we received 289 fraud cases during the year, so that's a lot to look at, and there's a breakdown in the report of what they're made up of. A lot of those referrals referred to council tax discount from the public, and we believe that's probably because of the increased activity from us, our pilot, targeting individuals, and hopefully words got around that you cannot get away with it anymore. We're out to identify you and correct it. So that's pleasing. We did have 2 formal whistleblowing referrals investigated and resolved in line with the whistleblowing policy during the year, and they're in the confidential appendix that can talk about in the closed session if needs be. So further details are in that, but due to the high level of content, I'm also happy to receive direct emails on any of those individual, I think it's about 37 cases. And that appendix also includes steps to insurance team for awareness as well. One point I wanted to mention our corporate fraud work to do with housing right to buy checks. You'll see there's a quite high stat in there, in that we reviewed 143 applications, mainly because of the reduction in the discount in November 2024. And as a result, we did actually knock back a few of those applications because they weren't adequate in terms of evidence, etc. The policy update, there's a large apologies for these papers. We've repeated and updated the anti-fraud and corruption policy, mainly because there's a new bit of legislation that's described in the report, Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, failure to prevent fraud. So it's important to note that the council can now be liable from September for fraud committed by employees, and importantly, by employees to benefit the organisation. So it's a bit of a niche fraud. It's not fraud generally, it's where an employee intends to commit a fraud but to benefit. An example of that would be, say, an employee falsifying a grant claim to try and get extra money for the council. That could be a false statement, that would be treated as fraud. Or maybe an employee conceals the number of software licenses that's being used by the organisation to save on costs that we're paying. So it's quite an unusual thing, but it could occur. My personal view is this act is predominantly targeting private companies where employees may be acting fraudulently to increase shareholder value. But it's still an important act, and it applies to local authorities. And so the key thing is that we have adequate fraud prevention measures. We've got loads of policies, so we have got some good prevention measures in place. However, one of the key elements is to make sure we've got top level commitment from senior management. So with that in mind, there's a new e-learning module that we are going to be persuading all of senior management to undertake, so that they've got full awareness of this new offence and their responsibilities under the Act. And finally, I just wanted to say we've carried out a good practice test against our arrangements against something called SITFA, managing the risk of fraud and corruption, and we're continuing to score highly on that. So hopefully the combination of all of our work, our assessment, as described in this report, should provide assurance on the effectiveness of our governance arrangements in combating fraud and corruption in the council. Thank you. I welcome any questions.
Thank you. And again, that was very clear. Appreciate that. Councillor Jedman.
Yes, this is a naive question, but I can't see, this is on page 220, 156 blue badges have been cancelled because the people died. But surely, if they're dead, they won't be using them. So how does that constitute a fraud? Or is it money or something? Can you explain?
It's a good question. It's not actually fraud. It could be a fraud. Yeah. So that blue badge could still be in use because the council hasn't been notified. However, through this data matching exercise, we get notified earlier. Yeah. So it could be used by a relative or someone else. And the idea is to get that out of circulation as soon as possible.
Can I come back on that? Because I must say, speaking of Christchurch, we had a terrible time with one of our car parks when it said disabled must pay. So obviously that was the beginning of the blue badges. But yeah, I see what you mean. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have the independent member, Lindsay, online.
I've got 3 questions. The first one is on page 223, paragraph 7 and 8. It talks about the fraud cases. So the fraud cases increased to 289, was almost double, but the head count on the same page remained the same with 4 head count and only 2 specialists. So how did that affect the capacity in the internal audit department when the cases increase so significantly? Question number 2 is with regards to the SIPFA count. After SIPFA audit of 94% achieved, which is very good, well done. I just want to know what's the 6% that wasn't achieved, and then who performed the assessment, and was the results of the assessment reviewed by any other a peer review by another employee or external party or maybe internal audit? If you can just yeah. And then the last question is on this new on page 266 and 265 with the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, what you've implemented. So it says under paragraph 3, or the main heading 3, what has the council put in place to prevent fraud? So it's good, a good coverage, but maybe just a bit generic, but I'm sure this is the first draft, so you still will work on it as the years go by. For instance, I'm just referring now to number 5, the communication including training. It says it includes mandatory fraud training, annual refresher and counter fraud policies and associated communication to staff. So it's a very blanket and general comment to say what the council has done is to include training. However, you've done, even though it's a good percentage of 87% of the staff members have completed the training, it's not 100%. So maybe to craft what the council has done more in relation, not as generic, to what is achievable when you state what the council has put in place, except if it is per this act that you have to have all of these at 100%. I hope that makes sense. Because it's not achievable at 100% as it's only 87% achieved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Did you take
I
notes of
can
those?
try and I can try and answer those 3. But may
If you
need
wish
to
to
come
take
back.
anything away subsequently, that's fine as well. But any comments you can give?
That's okay.
are
The
appreciated.
first question is quite easy to answer, and it's a very good one in terms of how can we support the capacity of dealing with a lot more referrals. The simple answer is going back to my comment that most of those additional referrals were council tax discount type concerns. They were fed into the same machine that we were using for the pilot, so we had resource already available to look at that. So that's why it didn't affect it, but it makes sense. That makes sense as a question, and we're not expecting that to be the same level. Or if it is the same level, we will not be investigating that. We will pass those concerns to the council tax department. So capacity will be held there, and they're investigated. Just for clarity, they're investigated for error, not fraud, for council tax. And that's the general approach for most councils up and down the country. Turning to the second question regarding the SIP for 94%. Again, very good question and fair point. I will need to get back to you on those areas that we have not fully got up to speed on. And I fully take your point that the assessment is done by myself and my colleague, and it could be seen to be done more independently, and that's something we could consider for future years if desired. That's not a problem. The tool itself is actually quite an old tool. I think it's nearly 5 or 6 years old. So we were looking for something ideally newer, but maybe if we find something newer, then it goes hand in hand with maybe getting some external verification on that as well. So yeah, so take that on board. Lastly, I was a little bit confused. You started talking about the new failure to prevent fraud arrangements. In terms of the preventative arrangements, there's a whole Appendix F in the new policy, so there is very much detailed in there.
I think if it's helpful, I think it's referring to on page 260 of our packs, under section 3. This is all in the red text. Number 5, the second sentence is, this includes mandatory fraud training. And I think the point was maybe don't commit to anything that could be interpreted as 100%, because obviously that's not achievable. So it's more, and it was part of a general point about tightening the language where needed, but no general concerns about what you've got.
Okay, no, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Is that right, Lindy?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. You said about the high rate of staff completing of training of 87%. I just wondered if you have a figure for councillors, and if it's a particularly low figure. I sit on the standards committee, so I'm aware that there is some work going on with regards to mandatory training. So I'm wondering whether it should potentially come back there.
Yes. Again, thank you for that question. Very pertinent one. I have actually been involved in the review of that area literally 6 months ago, and it wasn't as high as I'd hoped it to be. So any further improvement in that would be very much encouraged, and if this committee can support that, I'd appreciate that.
Is there something we could do as a committee that you suggest that would be helpful? Just want to take away.
Yeah, I believe it was down to the head of democratic services to persuade all members to undertake all of the mandatory training, and that's quite a task. So, but for me, fraud prevention is key. So
I think in standards committee we decided that you couldn't sit on the standards committee unless you'd taken certain training. So maybe that's something to think about. Monitoring officer, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. And just to reassure the committee that it's something that both Mr Jones and I take very seriously. There are limits to the unilateral way we can persuade, if not enforce, but it doesn't mean there are no options at all. We couldn't probably air these now, but certainly something that Richard Jones and I are looking back to report back to standards, part of our review that we have going on. So I think it is a big concern, and I think it would be a concern to the public. And as the officer who's responsible for the in-council's governance, something that I take very seriously as well. So I would like to think that all councillors do buy into it. Where they can't, we'll try and support them to understand why. Sometimes there are reasons relating to disability and things which remain confidential. We will always try and seek to support them, like we would any employee. And for example, I'm interested in that crossover between how HR supports some of our colleagues do this mandatory training. We have nearly 5,000 employees. We have 76 councillors. So I'm confident we can get it better and encourage rather than persuade. But it's finding the barriers and understanding some of the issues that arise. So it's definitely on my plate. It's definitely on Mr Jones's plate as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, Mr Richards has mocked the old Christchurch Borough Council, so antiquated ways here, but we still have a ducking stool in Christchurch. If BCP are interested in that for malfeasant members.
CFO.
Can I just reiterate, I did not do what I was just accused of. I just merely stated facts.
Acknowledged. Councillor Andrews.
Councillor Tyler, I will actually say that's gone over to BCP, that ducking stool. It's one of the assets that went over. So it can be used by standards committee if required. I've got a point. It's probably not so much for you because this list on page 223 is fraud and everything like that. But this links into non-domestic rates. Obviously, I know if you've got a shop, let's say, and it's empty, you don't pay any business rates for 3 months. But the revenues people, are they proactive in actually checking whether it's still empty or collecting rates, if it's still got contents in it? It's obviously the government's moved the goalposts and made it more difficult for people to move boxes in, boxes out and everything like that. You're probably familiar with that dodge to avoid business rates. But are we actually proactive in making sure that somebody who's claiming, and it's on a factory, you actually get half a year of not paying business rates if you tick a box, wrongly perhaps, that it's empty. And I'm just wondering whether people actually check on this. I'm of an age whereby houses used to pay rates. This is before poll tax and before council tax. And I had a house down in Eyford area of Bournemouth, and I actually had left some furniture in it, I have to admit. And the council officer actually wrote to me and said, well, I should start paying rates. So I'm just wondering whether we are actually proactive in seeing whether people are misusing the void rates, particularly on industrial property, which is half a year's of income.
Chair, if I may, through you, we have a specific team within our registered benefits department, if you like, that is solely focused on the collection and billing of business rates. As part of that process, they do take proactive action with regards to ensuring that businesses are paying the appropriate amount. Clearly, as you referenced, there are some very thin lines here between avoidance and evasion, and they have to, note that and work within that legislation with regards to that recovery. But to give you some assurance, we have some really good business rates, recovery rates compared to other local authorities.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Do we have any other questions on this item? Right. The report recommendations that the counter fraud work and investigations carried out by internal audit during 2024-25 be noted, that the whistleblowing referrals received during 2024-25 be noted. Do you have consensus on this? Yep. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right. Last item, forward plan. Who's speaking to this one?
I can speak to this, Chair. It's relatively self-explanatory, of course. One of the things I wanted to point out that we didn't speak about earlier is originally the health and safety update was also originally entitled Health and Safety and Fire Safety Update. Because the two teams are not linked anymore, there is and are in different departments of the council, and their cycles of busyness, if that's the right phrase, is different. We have moved with the chair's agreement the fire safety element of that previous report to be a separate report from now on going forward, and it's coming to the January 26 core meeting. So that's in the new list. And then what we've tried to do is take into account the various things around, background discussions on Carter's Quay and future places. So they're all laid out in this table.
Yeah, just to add, I did mean to say that about the fire safety, but I thought you would agree as a committee that we didn't necessarily have to have them in the same report if it made a difference to officers. I just wanted to mention our next meeting is on the 6th of November, and that will be a future places investigation specific item. Then given how the last one went, I think it would be sensible for us to plan on the basis that we might need a third one. But I'd be keen to limit it to that. Limit it to that, and then decide at that point decide next steps. Now I've got a question over the 27th of November meeting. It's possible we could have Carter's Quay come to that. I'm told the officers have that ready to come to us. But it sort of depends a little bit on what the external auditor says about their report, and whether or not that report will need almost the whole session for us to understand in full. Do we want to lump that in with Carter's Quay? There's obviously the potential for the external auditor's report to need to be pushed back. Fingers crossed, no words to suggest it is at the moment, but we might need to flex that if needed. And then we'll be in touch separately about this spillover third Future Places meeting, which will be around that time. But then we should get back onto the kind of more regular cycle from January. So in short, I will follow up by email. Did we have anything else to discuss on this item? Right. The Audit and Governance Committee approves the forward plan for 25-26 as set out in Appendix A. Do we have consensus on that? Thank you. Now, not quite the time I hoped we'd finish, a bit longer, quite a bit later. So thank you for everyone's patience. But I think it was useful to get into some of the detail that we don't always get a chance to get into on some of those items. So yeah, and I think there were some really good discussions there. So thank you very much, everybody. Good evening.